Hey guys, welcome back to my new channel. Today we will see Harry Potter story. If you like the video, please leave like, share and comment and share with your friends. Now let's start the video.
Chapter 1, The Breaking Point. The cupboard smelled like dust and old shoes and the copper tang of blood from where Harry had bitten through his lip to keep from crying out. He'd learned that lesson early. Crying made it worse. Crying meant Uncle Vernon would come back, face purple with rage, belt already in hand, demanding to know what Harry had to cry about. He'd give him something to cry about. So Harry had taught himself silence the way other children learn to tie their shoes, through repetition, through necessity, through the understanding that survival required adaptation. The darkness didn't bother him anymore. He'd spent more hours of his 7 years in this cupboard than out of it, and his eyes had grown accustomed to finding the thin line of light beneath the door, to mapping the space by touch and memory. 3 steps from the door to his mattress. The shelf above his head where he kept his broken soldiers, the ones Dudley had thrown away. The spider in the corner who Harry had named Charlotte, because he'd heard the name in a film once when Aunt Petunia thought he was cleaning the kitchen and the television was on. Charlotte was the closest thing Harry had to a friend. His back burned where the belt had caught him, 5 times, maybe 6, he'd lost count somewhere in the middle when the pain had whited out his thoughts. The offense this time had been existing in Dudley's line of sight when Dudley wanted to complain about his breakfast. Aunt Petunia had promised him pancakes, but the batter had gone wrong somehow. Harry suspected Dudley had poured salt into the flour bin again, just to watch his mother scramble, and Dudley had needed someone to blame. Harry was always available for blame. He pressed his cheek against the cool wood of the cupboard wall and let his mind drift, the way he did when the pain was too much and sleep wouldn't come. He thought about the television programs he'd glimpsed through doorways, the ones where children had bedrooms with windows and parents who hugged them and said they loved them. He thought about the books he'd stolen moments with in the library at school, the ones about magic and adventure and children who discovered they were special, who were whisked away to better places. He thought about the police programs. The ones where people in uniforms came to help when something bad was happening. Where they listened, and believed, and took the bad people away. Something shifted in Harry's chest. Not hope, he'd stopped believing in hope around the time Aunt Petunia had told him his parents were worthless drunks who died in a car crash because they were too stupid to live. Something harder than hope. Something colder. Knowledge. He knew things, Harry did. He knew that what happened in this house wasn't normal, because he'd seen the way other children moved through the world, unafraid, unbruised, certain of their place in it. He knew the Dursleys lied about him to the neighbors, calling him troubled, calling him a delinquent, making sure no one looked too closely at the thin, silent boy who appeared and disappeared like a ghost. He knew that somewhere, out there, were people whose entire job was to help children like him. He also knew that getting to those people would be difficult. That the Dursleys would stop him if they knew. That he'd have to be clever, and careful, and brave. Harry Potter had never felt particularly brave. But lying there in the dark, his back on fire and his stomach empty and his heart full of a terrible, clarifying anger, he realized that bravery might not be about feeling fearless. It might be about being so scared and so tired and so completely out of options that you did the frightening thing anyway, because the alternative was staying in this cupboard forever. He would not stay in this cupboard forever. He waited. The house fell silent in layers. First Dudley's television, then his elephant footsteps up the stairs, then the slam of his bedroom door. Then Uncle Vernon's heavy tread and the creak of the master bedroom floorboards. Aunt Petunia moved through the house like a wraith, checking locks, turning off lights, her shadow passing across the thin line of illumination beneath Harry's door. Finally, her footsteps ascended, and the house settled into its nighttime quiet. Harry counted to 1,000. Then he counted again, because being caught would mean more than another beating, it would mean suspicion, and watching, and probably a lock on the cupboard door that he couldn't open. At 2,000, he moved. He'd discovered the trick with the lock months ago, though he didn't understand it. If he pressed his palm against the mechanism and wanted desperately enough for it to open, sometimes it did. Not always. It seemed to depend on how strongly he felt, how clearly he could picture the lock clicking back, the door swinging free. The Dursleys called his inexplicable abilities his freakishness, and for a long time Harry had believed them, had believed there was something wrong with him, something unnatural and bad. But lately, he'd started to wonder if being a freak was really so terrible. After all, the Dursleys also called kindness a weakness and curiosity a fault. Maybe their definition of freakishness was equally wrong. He pressed his palm to the lock. He thought about the police station he'd seen from the school bus window, the blue lamp above the door, the serious-faced officers going in and out. He thought about walking through those doors and saying, "Help me, please, help me." The lock clicked. Harry caught his breath, held still, listened. The house remained silent. He eased the cupboard door open inch by inch, freezing whenever the hinges whispered, until the gap was wide enough for his thin body to slip through. The kitchen was dark, but Harry knew every obstacle by heart, the corner of the table that caught unwary shins, the squeaky board near the refrigerator, the drawer that stuck if you pulled it wrong. He moved through the space like smoke, gathering what he needed, his school shoes, worn but walkable. The jacket Dudley had outgrown and Aunt Petunia had grudgingly passed down, too big but warm enough. A torch from the emergency supplies Uncle Vernon kept under the sink. He thought about taking food, but decided against it. If he was caught outside, having provisions would look like planning. Better to seem like a confused child who wandered off in the night, at least until he reached somewhere safe. The back door lock required the same trick as the cupboard. Harry pressed and wished and felt something warm move through him, and the deadbolt slid back without a sound. The night air hit him like a blessing, cool and clean and free. Surrey in late October smelled like fallen leaves and distant fireplaces and the peculiar stillness that came after midnight. Harry stood on the back step and breathed deeply, letting the openness of the sky settle into his chest. He couldn't remember the last time he'd been outside after dark. The stars seemed impossibly bright, impossibly numerous, each one a tiny promise that the world was bigger than Privet Drive. He had 3 miles to walk. He'd memorized the route on his last trip to the library, tracing his finger along the map while pretending to look for a book on local history. The police station sat at the edge of Little Whinging's small commercial district, past the park and the cinema and the row of shops where Aunt Petunia bought her gossip along with her groceries. 3 miles wasn't far. Harry had walked to school and back every day for 2 years, in all weather, often without breakfast. 3 miles in the cool quiet of night, with no one watching, no one hurrying him along, no one ready to punish him for stepping wrong, that sounded almost pleasant. He started walking. The streets of Little Whinging looked different at night. Softer, somehow. The houses that seemed so imposing in daylight, with their identical lawns and their judging windows and their residents who looked at Harry like he was something unpleasant on their shoe, became almost peaceful in darkness. Just shapes against the sky, lights extinguished, everyone inside dreaming their ordinary dreams. Harry wondered what ordinary dreams felt like. His own were filled with green light and high laughter and a cold voice saying words he couldn't quite make out. He woke from those dreams shaking, his scar burning, his heart pounding with a terror he couldn't name. But tonight he wasn't thinking about dreams. Tonight he was thinking about one step, then another, then another. About the police station getting closer with every minute. About the words he would say when he got there. He'd practiced them, in his head, lying in the cupboard. Simple words. My uncle hurts me. My aunt doesn't feed me. I live in a cupboard under the stairs. Please help. Would they believe him? The Dursleys had spent years telling everyone what a liar Harry was, what a troublemaker, what a problem child. Mrs. Mason from down the street had once seen Harry in the garden with a black eye and had said, with a knowing sigh, that boys will be boys and isn't it a shame about that Potter child? The teachers at school looked through him like he was made of glass, or worse, looked at him with suspicion, as if his silence and his bruises were somehow his own fault. Harry had learned to expect disbelief. To expect dismissal. To expect that the adults who should protect him would fail, because they always had. But the police were different. They had to be. They investigated things. They looked for evidence. They didn't just take one person's word, they searched for truth. And Harry had something that might make them believe. Something he didn't quite understand but had learned to use, the way he'd learned to use the thing with locks. Sometimes, when he talked about what happened to him, really talked, not the careful nothing words he used with teachers but the real, desperate truth, people saw it. He'd discovered this by accident, crying in the school bathroom after Dudley and his gang had played their favorite game of Harry hunting, and a younger girl had walked in and asked what was wrong. Harry had told her, really told her, and her face had gone white as paper and she'd gasped and stepped back and said, "I saw it, I saw them hurting you, how did I see that?" Harry didn't know how. But he knew that when he spoke his truth with enough feeling behind it, something happened. Something that made people understand in a way words alone couldn't achieve. He would make the police understand. The park materialized out of the darkness, its swings hanging still and silent, its climbing frame casting strange shadows in the streetlight. Harry knew this park. Dudley and his friends came here sometimes, and Harry had learned to avoid it, to find other routes that didn't risk an encounter with his cousin's fists. But at this hour, the park belonged to no one. Harry allowed himself a moment to pause, to sit on a swing and push himself gently back and forth, feeling the cool chain links against his palms. He'd never actually been on a swing before. Whenever he'd tried, Dudley had shoved him off. The movement felt like flying might feel. Like freedom. Harry swung for exactly 60 seconds, he counted, because he couldn't afford to lose himself in the sensation, and then he got off and kept walking. The police station was less than a mile away now. His heart was beating faster, his palms were sweating despite the cold, and his stomach felt tight with a combination of hope and fear that was almost nauseating. What if they didn't believe him? What if they called the Dursleys and sent him back? What if this made everything worse? The questions circled in Harry's mind like crows, dark and persistent and impossible to silence. But his feet kept moving. He'd come too far to turn back now. Whatever happened at the police station, at least he would have tried. At least he would have done something instead of lying in that cupboard and waiting for the next blow. The commercial district appeared ahead, its shop windows dark but familiar. The bakery where Aunt Petunia bought bread and disapproved of everything. The newsagent where Uncle Vernon collected his paper and complained about the headlines. The cinema where the Dursleys had once taken Dudley and his friend while Harry stayed with Mrs. Figg in her cat-smelling house. And there, at the end of the street, the blue lamp glowing like a beacon, the little whinging police station. Harry stopped walking. His breath came fast and shallow, and his hands were shaking, and for a terrible moment he couldn't make himself move forward. The building looked solid and official and completely uninterested in the problems of one small, damaged boy. The officers inside had real crimes to solve, real emergencies to handle. Why would they care about Harry Potter and his cupboard and his uncle's belt? Because it's their job, Harry told himself fiercely. Because someone has to care. Because I matter, I matter, I matter, the thought felt like something breaking open inside him. He'd never thought those words before, not really. The Dursleys had spent 7 years teaching him the opposite, grinding it into his bones with every blow and cruel word and hour locked in darkness. But standing here, alone in the night, having walked 3 miles on determination and desperate hope, Harry Potter chose to believe something different. He mattered. He deserved help. And he was going to walk through those doors and ask for it. His feet started moving again. The police station lobby smelled like coffee and floor cleaner and something else underneath, something human and institutional. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, harsh after the gentle darkness outside. A woman in uniform sat behind a tall desk, her attention on paperwork, her face set in the expression of someone who'd seen too much and expected too little from midnight visitors. Harry stood just inside the door and tried to remember how to speak. The woman looked up. Her eyes moved over him, the too big jacket, the worn shoes, the careful way he held himself, and something shifted in her expression. Not softness, exactly. More like recognition. Like she'd seen children who looked like Harry before, and knew what that particular combination of caution and defiance usually meant. "Help you, love?" she asked, and her voice was gentler than her face. Harry opened his mouth. Closed it. His rehearsed words had evaporated, leaving only the raw truth underneath. He tried to organize his thoughts, to present his situation calmly and logically, but what came out was nothing like what he'd planned. "My uncle beats me," he said. "My aunt starves me. I sleep in a cupboard under the stairs and I'm not allowed to eat unless I do chores, and sometimes they don't let me eat even then. I have bruises all over my back right now because I made Dudley angry by looking at him wrong. I walked here because I don't know what else to do, and I thought maybe," he felt it happening before he could stop it. The thing he did sometimes, the freakish thing, the thing that made people see. Emotion built in his chest like pressure behind a dam, and his words carried more than meaning, they carried memory, sensation, truth. The desk sergeant's face went slack. Her pen dropped from her fingers. Her eyes widened, pupils dilating, and she made a sound that was almost a whimper, one hand coming up to press against her shoulder as if she'd been struck. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Oh my, I saw, how did I?" Harry didn't know what she'd seen, exactly. He never did. But the way she looked at him now was different from any way an adult had ever looked at him before. There was no dismissal in her face, no suspicion, no getting ready to tell him he must be exaggerating. Only horror, and belief, and something fierce that might have been anger on his behalf. "Stay right there," she said, and her voice was shaking. "Don't move, love. Don't go anywhere." She grabbed a phone and punched numbers with trembling fingers. Harry watched her and felt something loosen in his chest, something he hadn't even known was tight. She believed him. She'd seen, somehow, and she believed him. "This is Sergeant Davies at Little Whinging," she said into the phone. "I need child protection here immediately. And someone get D.I. Chen on the line. Yes, I know what time it is. Tell her it's bad. Tell her she needs to see this." She hung up and turned back to Harry. Her eyes were wet, and her jaw was set, and she came around the desk and knelt down so she was at his level, moving slowly, giving him plenty of time to back away if he wanted to. "My name's Sarah," she said. "I'm going to help you. No one is going to send you back to that house, do you understand? What's your name, love?" "Harry," he managed. "Harry Potter." The name meant nothing to her, just a string of sounds, but she nodded as if he'd given her something precious. "Harry. That's a good name. Right, Harry, I'm going to take you somewhere you can sit down, somewhere more comfortable than this lobby, and we're going to get you something to eat and drink. When's the last time you ate?" Harry had to think about it. "Yesterday. Lunch at school. Half a sandwich, Dudley took the other half." Sergeant Davies' face did something complicated. "Right. Food first, then. And while you eat, we're going to have some people come and talk to you, people whose whole job is helping kids like you. Is that all right?" Harry nodded. It was more than all right. It was everything he'd hoped for and been afraid to believe in. Sergeant Davies led him through a door and down a corridor and into a small room with soft chairs and a window looking out onto the back car park. She settled him onto one of the chairs and disappeared, returning a few minutes later with a cup of sweet tea and 2 chocolate biscuits from someone's desk drawer. "Best I could do at this hour," she said apologetically. "Proper food's coming." Harry hadn't had a chocolate biscuit he couldn't remember ever having a chocolate biscuit. He'd seen Dudley eat them, of course, 3 or 4 at a time while Harry stood in a corner and pretended not to be hungry. But actually eating one himself. He took a bite, and the sweetness exploded across his tongue, and for a moment he couldn't think about anything except how good it tasted. Sergeant Davies watched him with that complicated expression, the one that seemed to contain fury and gentleness in equal measure. "I'll be right outside," she said. "You're safe here, Harry. You're safe." She left the door open when she went, and Harry could hear her voice in the corridor, low and urgent, talking to someone else who'd arrived. He caught fragments. "You won't believe this, I don't know how but I saw it, get the DI here now." Harry finished his biscuit and started on the second one and felt, for the first time in his memory, like things might actually be okay. Detective Inspector Margaret Chin arrived 43 minutes later, which was impressive given that she'd been in bed in London when the call came. She was a small woman, Chinese-British, with short grey-streaked hair and eyes that missed nothing. She'd been working child protection for 18 years, had seen things that would break most people, and had developed a reputation for being impossible to rattle. The sergeant's report rattled her. "Run that by me again," she said, standing in the corridor outside the interview room. Through the window, she could see the boy, small for his age, clearly malnourished, with dark hair that stuck up in all directions and an unsettling self-possession in his bearing. He was sitting perfectly still, hands folded in his lap, watching the door with the wariness of an animal who'd learned to expect predators. "I don't know how to explain it, ma'am." Sergeant Davies was still shaking. 2 hours later. "He started telling me what happened, and I wasn't just hearing it. I was there. In his memories. I felt," she swallowed hard. "I felt the belt hit. I felt how hungry he was. I saw the inside of that cupboard like I was standing in it. That's not possible. I know it's not possible. But it happened." D.I. Chen had interrogated enough witnesses to know the difference between someone lying, someone mistaken, and someone telling a truth they didn't understand. Sergeant Davies wasn't lying or mistaken. She was genuinely, profoundly certain of what she'd experienced. Which meant either there was a gas leak causing shared hallucinations, or something very strange was happening with Harry Potter. "Has anyone else experienced this?" Chen asked. P.C. Morrison took his statement for the initial report. "Same thing, got about 2 sentences in and went white as a sheet. Said he could taste the boy's fear. I've got them separated, making sure they don't compare notes. Wanted you to see for yourself first." Chen nodded slowly. "Let me talk to him." She entered the interview room and closed the door behind her. The boy, Harry, watched her approach with that unsettling calm, his green eyes tracking her movements precisely. He looked like a child who had learned to read adults the way other children learn to read books, searching for signs of danger in every gesture and glance. "Hello, Harry," Chen said, pulling a chair around so she could sit facing him, not across the table but beside it, reducing the formality of the space. "My name is Margaret Chen. I'm a detective, which means I investigate when bad things happen to people, and I try to help fix them." "Sergeant Davies said you help children," Harry said. His voice was quiet but surprisingly steady. "That's right. I've helped a lot of children in situations like yours. I've heard what you told Sergeant Davies, but I'd like to hear it from you directly. Can you tell me what's been happening at home?" Harry was quiet for a moment, studying her face. Chen waited. Patience was half of this job, giving children space to speak when they'd been taught that speaking brought punishment. "If I tell you," Harry said finally, "you'll see it. Like she did. I don't know how to stop it." Chen's heart rate picked up, though she kept her expression neutral. "That's all right. I've been doing this job for a long time. I can handle it." Harry nodded, took a breath, and began to speak. "I've lived with my aunt and uncle since I was a baby. My parents died. They told me it was a car crash, but I don't think that's true. I don't think any of what they've told me is true. They hate me. Uncle Vernon calls me boy or freak. Aunt Petunia calls me a burden. My cousin Dudley calls me worse things, but he learned them from his parents, so I don't think it's his fault, not really." As he spoke, Chen felt the world shift around her. It started subtly, a sensation of pressure in her head, a darkening at the edges of her vision. Then, between one breath and the next, she wasn't in the interview room anymore. She was inside a cupboard. The walls pressed close on every side, barely wider than her shoulders. Dust filled her nose. Her back ached with the dull throb of old bruises and the sharp fire of new ones. Her stomach twisted with hunger, not the mild discomfort of a skipped meal but real hunger, the kind that came from days of scraps and restrictions, the kind that made it hard to think about anything else. Above her head, heavy footsteps moved across the floor. A voice boomed through the wood, "Freak. If I hear one more sound out of you tonight," she felt the fear. Not her own adult fear but a child's terror, the kind that came from absolute powerlessness, from knowing that the people who were supposed to protect her would hurt her instead, and there was nothing she could do, nowhere she could go, no one who would help. The vision snapped away, and Chen was back in the interview room, gripping the arms of her chair with white-knuckled hands. Her breath came fast and harsh. Her eyes were wet. Across from her, Harry watched with an expression of resigned acceptance, like he'd expected this reaction and was waiting to see what she'd do with it. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I can't control it." Chen's mind was reeling, trying to process what had just happened within the framework of reality as she understood it. She couldn't. It didn't fit. Nothing about what she'd just experienced should be possible. But it had happened. She'd been there, in that cupboard, in Harry's memories. She'd felt what he felt. The evidence of abuse that would take weeks of careful documentation to establish in a normal case, she'd experienced it firsthand, incontrovertibly, in the space of seconds. "Harry," she said, and her voice came out rough. "How long has this been going on?" "Always. Since I can remember. It got worse when I started school, because Dudley didn't like me doing better than him, so I had to make sure I didn't do better than him, and even then he needed someone to blame when things went wrong, and that was usually me." The words triggered another flash. Chen saw a classroom, a teacher writing on a board, Harry knowing the answer to a question but staying silent, head down, invisible, because the last time he'd raised his hand Dudley had caught him after school and held him down while his friends. She pulled herself back with effort. The vision seemed to respond to her attention, to her desire to understand. If she kept asking questions, she'd keep seeing answers. "Harry, I need you to know something." Chen leaned forward, meeting his eyes directly. "What your aunt and uncle have done to you is criminal. It's wrong. It's not your fault, and you didn't deserve any of it. You're going to be safe now. You're not going back to that house." Something flickered in Harry's expression, a crack in that careful composure. His lower lip trembled, just for a moment, before he controlled it. "Promise?" he asked, and suddenly he sounded his age. 7 years old and afraid to hope. "I promise," Chen said, and meant it with everything she had. "I'm going to personally make sure those people are held accountable for what they've done to you. And I'm going to make sure you have somewhere safe to live, with people who will treat you properly. That's my job, and I'm very good at it." Harry nodded slowly. The tears he'd been holding back spilled over, running silently down his cheeks. He didn't sob, didn't make a sound, even his crying was quiet, controlled, the crying of a child who'd learned that noise brought punishment. Chen's heart broke a little. 18 years of this work, and it still broke her, every time. "Right," she said, pulling herself together. "I'm going to have some doctors look at you, make sure you're healthy, document your injuries. Then we're going to get you somewhere comfortable to sleep, a real bed, with proper food before. And tomorrow, we're going to start building a case against your aunt and uncle. Does that sound all right?" "Yes," Harry said. That sounds good." Chen stood and moved toward the door, then paused. "Harry, that thing you do, the way you make people see your memories. How long have you been able to do that?" Harry shrugged, a small, uncertain gesture. "I don't know. I didn't know I was doing it until a girl at school told me she saw what I was talking about. I thought everyone could do it. Can't they?" "No," Chen said slowly. "No, Harry, they can't." She left the room and closed the door and stood in the corridor for a long moment, her mind churning through implications she didn't have the framework to understand. Something was happening here. Something far beyond her experience. The visions, the boy's ability, the sense she had that Harry Potter was not entirely ordinary, none of it fit any category she knew. But that was a mystery for later. Right now, she had a child abuse case to build, and she was going to build the strongest case of her career. Whatever else Harry Potter might be, he was first and foremost a victim who deserved justice. Everything else could wait. The doctors came, efficient and careful, documenting Harry's injuries with clinical precision that couldn't quite mask their horror. The radiographs showed healed fractures, 3 of them, at different stages of recovery, suggesting separate incidents. The physical examination found malnutrition, vitamin deficiencies, scarring consistent with repeated trauma. The photographs would fill a folder that would make a jury weep. Through it all, Harry cooperated with the same unsettling composure, answering questions in that quiet, steady voice, allowing himself to be examined and photographed and documented as evidence of his own suffering. He didn't complain, didn't flinch, didn't ask for breaks. He moved through the process like someone who had decided to endure one more unpleasant thing, because unpleasant things were what his life was made of. Chen watched from outside the examination room and made notes and tried not to think about what would happen when word of this case got out. A child with mysterious abilities. Medical evidence that would make headlines. The boy's strange name, which meant nothing to her but which she'd already noticed provoked odd reactions from certain members of the morning shift. When P.C. Murphy had heard the name Harry Potter, he'd gone pale and asked her to repeat it. When she had, he'd muttered something about making a phone call and disappeared for 20 minutes. She'd seen him in the car park afterward, talking urgently into his personal mobile, looking around as if afraid of being overheard. Something was very wrong in Little Whinging. Something bigger than one abused child and his monstrous relatives. Chen could feel it, the way she'd learned to feel when a case was connected to something larger, an instinct built from years of investigations that started simple and turned complicated. But right now, her focus was Harry. Everything else could wait. Dawn was breaking over Surrey when Chen finally finished the initial paperwork. Harry had been fed, properly fed, a full breakfast that he'd eaten with the methodical attention of someone who'd learned not to take food for granted, and settled into a temporary placement at a children's home 20 miles away. Far enough that the Dursleys couldn't easily find him. Close enough that Chen could check on him. The arrest warrants for Vernon and Petunia Dursley had been issued. Officers were en route to Privet Drive. In a few hours, Harry's uncle and aunt would be in custody, and the long process of justice would begin. Chen sat at her desk and stared at the file she'd compiled, photographs, medical reports, interview transcripts, witness statements. It was damning evidence. Irrefutable. Any prosecutor would take one look at this case and start planning their victory speech. But there was one element she couldn't include. One piece of evidence that would make anyone who heard about it question her sanity. The visions. The way Harry made people see his memories. She'd talked to Davies, Morrison, the nurse who'd examined Harry, the social worker who'd processed his placement. Every one of them had experienced the same thing, the sensation of being inside Harry's memories, of feeling what he felt, of knowing the truth of his experiences with a certainty that transcended normal witness testimony. None of them could explain it. None of them wanted to talk about it, not officially. It was too strange, too impossible, too far outside the bounds of what reality was supposed to contain. Chen drummed her fingers on her desk and thought about P.C. Murphy and his mysterious phone call. She thought about the way Harry had said his parents' death wasn't really a car crash. She thought about how, despite 7 years of abuse, despite being systematically starved and beaten and confined, Harry Potter had walked 3 miles in the middle of the night to ask for help, had shown more courage and determination at 7 years old than most adults mustered in a lifetime. There was more to this story. More to this boy. And Chen was going to find out what it was. But first, she needed sleep. And then she needed to watch Vernon and Petunia Dursley realize that their years of cruelty had finally caught up with them. The arrest of the Dursleys made the local news by noon. Chen wasn't there for the arrest itself. She'd been ordered to get some rest after being awake for nearly 30 hours, but she watched the footage later. Vernon, apoplectic with rage, bellowing about his rights and his good name and the boy being a liar who'd obviously manipulated everyone. Petunia, ice-pale and silent, her thin face set in an expression of martyred disbelief. Neither of them looked like monsters. They looked like ordinary people, a businessman and a housewife, pillars of their community, the last people you'd expect to find starving a child in a cupboard. That was the thing about monsters, Chen had learned. They rarely looked the part. The footage also showed the neighbors, gathered on their lawns to watch the spectacle. Some looked shocked. Some looked smug, like they'd known all along that something wasn't right in number 4. And some, Chen noted their faces, memorized their features, looked angry. Not at the Dursleys, but at the police. At the disruption to their quiet street. At the exposure of something they'd rather have kept hidden. Little whinging was circling its wagons. Whatever came next, this community was going to make things difficult. But Chen had dealt with difficult communities before. She'd dealt with powerful people closing ranks around abusers. She'd dealt with victims who were blamed and disbelieved and pressured to recant. And she'd won, more often than not, because she was patient and thorough and absolutely relentless when a child's welfare was at stake. Harry Potter was going to get justice. Chen would make sure of it. 3 days after the arrest, something strange happened at the police station. Chen was in her office, reviewing case files, when Sergeant Davies knocked on her door. "Ma'am, there's someone here to see you." "About the Potter case." "A witness? Family member?" Davies hesitated. I'm not sure what she is, ma'am. She says she's from a special government department. She showed credentials, but I've never seen anything like them. And she's odd." Chen's instincts prickled. "What kind of odd?" "She's wearing a cloak, ma'am. A proper cloak, like something out of a costume shop. And she asked to see the files using words that don't quite fit. She called the photographs still pictures like she'd never heard of cameras before." Chen stood slowly. "Where is she now?" "Interview room 2. I didn't want to let her wander." "Good. I'll be right there." She took her time walking to the interview room, gathering her thoughts. A government department she'd never heard of. Anachronistic clothing and language. An interest in Harry Potter specifically. This was the other shoe she'd been waiting to drop. Whatever was strange about Harry, it was connected to something larger, and that something was coming to her. She opened the door to interview room 2. The woman inside was tall, with a stern face and graying hair pulled back in a tight bun. She wore emerald green robes, not a cloak, Chen corrected herself, robes, and a pointed hat that should have looked ridiculous but somehow didn't. Her eyes, behind square spectacles, were sharp and assessing. "Detective Inspector Chen," the woman said. "Thank you for seeing me. My name is Minerva McGonagall, and I'm here about Harry Potter." Chen closed the door and sat down across from her unexpected visitor. "Ms. McGonagall. You said you're from a government department?" "In a manner of speaking." McGonagall's lips thinned. "What I'm about to tell you will be difficult to believe. But I think, given what you've experienced in the last few days, you may be more prepared to accept it than most." "I'm listening." "Harry Potter is not an ordinary child. His parents, James and Lily Potter, were not ordinary people. And the world Harry comes from, my world, is something your government is aware of but has agreed to keep secret." Chen said nothing. She'd learned long ago that silence often prompted more information than questions. McGonagall seemed to appreciate this. "There is no easy way to say this, so I will be direct. Magic is real. There is an entire society of magical people living alongside yours, hidden from ordinary perception. Harry Potter is magical. His parents were magical. And his ability to share memories through speech, while unusual even by our standards, is a manifestation of that magic. Chen stared at her. Then she reached into her pocket, pulled out her mobile phone, and set it on the table between them. If magic is real, she said calmly, show me. McGonagall raised an eyebrow. You believe me so quickly? I don't believe anything yet. But I've spent 3 days trying to explain how Harry Potter can make people see his memories, and I've gotten nowhere. If you have an explanation, prove it. McGonagall drew a thin wooden stick from her sleeve, a wand. Chen realized, the fairy tale prop suddenly present and real, and pointed it at the phone. The phone floated off the table. It spun slowly in midair, screen lighting up, displaying Chen's lock-screen photo of her daughter's graduation. Then it transformed, metal and glass flowing like water, reshaping itself into a small silver bird that spread wings made of circuitry and took flight around the room. Chen watched it fly. Her hands were steady. Her heart was pounding. The bird landed on the table and became a phone again. That's my work phone, Chen said, picking it up. All my case files are on it. I assure you, nothing has been altered. The transformation was purely physical. Forgive me if I verify that later. McGonagall nodded, a hint of approval in her expression. I would expect nothing less. Chen set the phone down and leaned forward. So magic is real. Harry is magical. Where have you been for the last 7 years while he was being beaten and starved by his relatives? The question hit home. McGonagall's stern composure cracked, revealing grief and guilt beneath. I warned against placing him there, she said quietly. The day he was left on their doorstep, and yes, he was left, like a parcel, in the middle of the night, I told Albus Dumbledore that they were the worst sort of people. I watched them all day. I saw how they treated their own son, the casual cruelty, the narrow-mindedness. I knew they would never love Harry. And yet he was placed there anyway. Dumbledore had reasons. Protections tied to blood. Harry's mother died protecting him, and her sacrifice created a magical shield that would keep him safe from certain threats. But that protection required him to live with blood relatives. Petunia Dursley was Lily's sister. So Harry's safety from these threats was more important than his safety from his own family. McGonagall flinched. When you put it that way. I'm putting it the way a jury will put it. A child was placed in an abusive home, and the people responsible knew, or should have known, that abuse was likely. They chose to prioritize other concerns over his immediate welfare. In my world, that's criminal negligence. I understand. And I'm not here to make excuses. McGonagall straightened, recovering her composure. I'm here because we need to discuss what happens next. Harry Potter is famous in our world. He's the boy who lived, the child who survived an attack by the darkest wizard in a century. His placement with the Dursleys was meant to be kept secret, to protect him from both enemies and the overwhelming attention of our society. But that secrecy has failed, and the failure has harmed him grievously. So now what? You swoop in and take him away to your magical world? It's more complicated than that. There are laws, magical laws, about how to handle situations where our world intersects with yours. There are procedures, protocols, officials who will want to have their say. Normally, we would simply erase the memories of everyone involved and start fresh. Chen's hand moved instinctively to her phone. You're not erasing anything. No. We're not. McGonagall met her eyes. Whatever we normally do, this situation is not normal. Harry's ability, what he did to you and the others, has never been documented before. Memories that he shares seem to resist modification. Our attempts to contain this situation through standard methods have already failed. You've tried to erase my memories. Not yours specifically. But the Obliviators, our memory modification specialists, have reported difficulties with everyone who witnessed Harry's projections. The memories don't respond to spells the way they should. Whatever Harry does when he shares his experiences, it creates something permanent. Chen absorbed this. So you can't cover this up. It seems not. Which means we need to find another way forward. One that protects both Harry and the secrecy our world depends on. McGonagall paused. And I believe you may be the key to making that work. Me? You have seen what Harry can do. You have experienced the truth of his suffering directly. You believe him in a way that cannot be undone. And you have the skills, the authority, and, forgive me, the stubbornness to see justice done. A faint smile crossed McGonagall's stern face. I watched your interview with Harry through observation charms. You're formidable, Inspector Chen. The kind of person who doesn't let go until the job is finished. Chen considered this for a long moment. What exactly are you proposing? A partnership. Between your investigation and ours. There will be a parallel process in our world, a hearing before our governing body, the Wizengamot, addressing the failures that led to Harry's placement and the crimes committed against him. I want you to be part of it. To ensure that Muggle, non-magical, justice has its say, and that the people responsible cannot hide behind magical law to escape accountability. And the secrecy your world depends on will have to bend, in this case. Some secrets must be kept. But others, when keeping them means protecting abusers, deserve to be broken. Chen looked at McGonagall for a long moment, assessing her the way she assessed suspects and witnesses and everyone else who passed through her professional life. The woman seemed genuine. Her guilt about Harry was real. Her desire to fix what had gone wrong appeared authentic. But there were things she wasn't saying. Things hidden behind the grief and the determination. Tell me about these threats you mentioned, Chen said. The ones Harry was being protected from. What exactly was so dangerous that leaving him with abusers was considered acceptable? McGonagall's face went very still. His name, she said finally, was Voldemort. And if you're going to be part of this, Inspector Chen, you need to understand exactly what Harry Potter has already survived, and what may still be coming. In a castle in Scotland, far from London streets, an old man with a long white beard sat in his office and stared at a small silver instrument on his desk. The instrument had been monitoring Harry Potter's welfare for 7 years. It measured his health, his emotional state, his magical development. For 7 years, it had shown readings that Albus Dumbledore had chosen to interpret as acceptable, not thriving, certainly, but surviving. Learning self-reliance. Building the resilience he would need for what lay ahead. Now the instrument showed something different. Harry was no longer at Privet Drive. His blood protection, tied to his residence with Petunia, was weakening. And his magical signature was doing something it had never done before, reaching outward, touching other minds, leaving marks that Dumbledore's best researchers couldn't fully explain. The boy had told the Muggles everything. Shown them everything. Created witnesses who couldn't be obliterated. The careful plan Dumbledore had built over 7 years, keeping Harry hidden, keeping him humble, keeping him away from the wizarding world's attention until he was ready, was crumbling. And the worst part was that Dumbledore couldn't even say it was unjust. He'd known the Dursleys were cruel. He'd told himself it was necessary. He'd weighed a child's suffering against the greater good and made his choice. Now that choice was coming back to him, as choices always did. The door to his office opened, and Minerva McGonagall stepped through, her face set in an expression he knew well, the one she wore when she was about to tell him something he didn't want to hear. "It's worse than we thought," she said. "The Muggle investigator isn't going to be deterred. She's documented everything. And she's already asking questions about why Harry was placed with the Dursleys in the first place." Dumbledore nodded slowly. "And the boy himself?" "Recovered. Physically, at least." "But Albus," Minerva's voice cracked slightly. "The medical reports. The photographs. I knew it would be bad, but seeing the evidence, understanding exactly what we allowed to happen. You're not the only one who bears responsibility. I saw them, that first day. I told you they were awful. And then I did nothing. For 7 years, I did nothing. Minerva's hands clenched at her sides. That ends now. I don't care what it costs, politically, professionally, personally. Harry Potter is going to receive justice, and the people who failed him are going to be held accountable. All of them. Dumbledore met her eyes and saw the steel beneath the gilt. Minerva McGonagall was many things, brilliant, demanding, fiercely protective of her students, but above all, she was honest. When she made a promise, she kept it. All of them, he repeated softly. All of them. He bowed his head. Then we had best begin preparing. Because I suspect the storm that's coming will spare no one. In a temporary bed at a children's home in Surrey, Harry Potter slept. For the first time in his memory, his dreams were not filled with green light and cold laughter. Instead, he dreamed of soft things, clean sheets, warm food, voices that spoke kindly. He dreamed of the police officer who'd promised to help him, and the sergeant who'd cried when she'd seen his memories, and the doctor who'd handled him so gently while documenting everything the Dursleys had done. He dreamed of being believed. It wouldn't last, part of him knew. Nothing good ever lasted. Something would go wrong, the Dursleys would talk their way out of trouble, or the investigators would decide Harry had exaggerated, or the strange people from the world his aunt and uncle had tried to hide would arrive and make everything complicated. But for now, in this moment, Harry Potter was safe. He was fed. He was warm. And somewhere in the depths of his sleeping mind, something powerful was waking up. The magic that had let him share his memories, that had made people see and feel and believe, it was only the beginning. Harry didn't know it yet, but he was something the magical world had never seen before. His mother's sacrifice, his father's blood, the curse that had failed to kill him, they had combined to create abilities that would change everything. The wizarding world thought they knew who Harry Potter was. The boy who lived. A symbol, a savior, a piece in the great game against darkness. They were about to learn that Harry Potter was not a piece. He was a player. And he was just getting started. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, The Collision of Worlds. The morning after Minerva McGonagall's visit, D.I. Chin arrived at the station to find chaos. 3 people in robes were arguing with Sergeant Davies at the front desk. 2 wore the deep purple of what Chin now recognized as official magical attire, ministry types, she guessed, bureaucrats who moved through the world expecting deference. The third was a harried-looking man in lime green robes with a badge that read, Obliviation Services. Davies spotted Chen and the relief on her face was palpable. Ma'am, these individuals are insisting on access to our case files. I've told them they need to go through proper channels, but they're claiming some kind of jurisdictional authority I've never heard of. The taller of the purple-robed officials turned to Chen with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Ah, you must be Detective Inspector Chen. I'm Cornelius Fudge, Minister for Magic. I'm here to resolve this unfortunate situation. Chen studied him. Mid-50s, soft around the middle, the look of a politician who'd spent more time in meetings than doing actual work. His smile was practiced, his handshake when he offered it was damp, and everything about his body language screamed I expect you to cooperate. She didn't shake his hand. Minister Fudge, she said. I wasn't aware magical governments made house calls. His smile flickered. Yes, well. This is a sensitive matter. The Potter boy is quite important to our community, and we're naturally concerned about his welfare. I'm sure you understand that this situation requires delicate handling. Delicate handling. Chen let the words hang in the air. A 7-year-old was systematically abused for his entire life. He walked 3 miles in the middle of the night to ask for help. And you're here to talk about delicate handling. Now, Inspector, there's no need for hostility. I'm not hostile, Minister. I'm busy. I have a case to build, evidence to process, and a child who needs to see his abusers face justice. If you have information that's relevant to my investigation, I'm happy to hear it. If you're here to make this situation disappear, you're wasting your time." Fudge's face reddened. The man in lime green shifted uncomfortably. The second purple-robed official, a woman with a monocle and a severe expression, stepped forward. "Perhaps we should discuss this somewhere private," she said. Her voice was calm, authoritative. "I'm Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. I believe we have shared interests, Inspector Chen." Chen looked at her for a long moment. Unlike Fudge, this woman had the bearing of someone who actually worked for a living. The set of her jaw, the directness of her gaze, these were things Chen recognized. A fellow investigator. Possibly an ally. "My office," she said. "Fudge stays here." "Now see here," Fudge sputtered. "Minister, I believe Inspector Chen and I can handle the preliminary discussions," Amelia said smoothly. "I'll brief you on the outcomes." Before Fudge could argue further, Chen was already walking. After a moment, Amelia followed. Chen's office was small and cluttered, case files stacked on every surface, photographs pinned to a corkboard, a half-empty cup of tea growing cold on her desk. She didn't apologize for the mess. Instead, she closed the door, gestured to the single visitor's chair, and leaned against her desk with her arms crossed. "Talk," she said. Amelia sat, crossing her ankles precisely. "You've met Minerva McGonagall. She told you about our world. She told me enough to understand what I'm dealing with. She also told me that your people have already tried to erase my memories and failed." A flicker of something, surprise. Respect, crossed Amelia's face. "Minerva is thorough. Yes, there have been attempts. Standard protocol when magical matters intersect with Muggle awareness. They haven't worked. Whatever Harry Potter did when he shared his memories with you, it's created something our magic can't undo." "Good. Inspector Chen, I'm not here to fight you. I'm here because a child was horrifically abused, and I want justice as much as you do. Possibly more. Then why did Fudge come along?" Amelia's expression tightened. "Because the minister sees this as a political problem to be managed, not a crime to be solved. Harry Potter is significant in our world. His placement with the Dursleys was arranged by Albus Dumbledore, who is one of the most powerful figures in magical Britain. Exposing the failure of that placement threatens powerful interests. And you? What do you see this as?" "I see a 7-year-old boy with healed fractures and malnutrition and scars from a belt. I see a system that should have protected him and didn't. And I see an opportunity to make sure it never happens again." Amelia met Chen's eyes. "I've spent 20 years in magical law enforcement. I've fought dark wizards, investigated murders, sent people to prison for terrible crimes. But this might be the most important case of my career. Because it's not about catching a criminal, it's about exposing a rot at the heart of our society." Chen said nothing for a long moment, evaluating. She'd interviewed thousands of people over her career. She'd learned to read sincerity, to spot deception, to sense the hidden agendas behind smooth words. Amelia Bones believed what she was saying. That didn't mean she could be trusted, people could be sincere and still have blind spots, but it meant something. "What do you propose?" Chen asked finally. "A joint investigation. Parallel tracks, your prosecution of the Dursleys through Muggle courts, and a wizarding inquiry into how Harry was placed with them and why nobody intervened. I want you involved in our process. As an observer, a consultant, whatever role works. I want Muggle eyes on our justice system, because I don't trust everyone in it to do the right thing. You want me to keep your people honest. I want evidence that can't be dismissed. Harry's memory projections affect Muggles and magical folk alike. You've experienced them, we've experienced them, and none of us can pretend we didn't see what we saw. That shared evidence is unprecedented. It could change everything. Chen considered this. It was a reasonable proposal, strategically sound. But there was something Amelia wasn't addressing. What about Harry himself? What happens to him when all this is over? Amelia's expression softened slightly. That's complicated. The blood protections Dumbledore placed require him to live with blood relatives. With the Dursleys imprisoned, those protections will fail. There will be pressure to place him with a magical family. Several have already expressed interest. Interest based on his celebrity, not his welfare. Almost certainly. Which is why I'm going to recommend that any custody decision involve both magical and muggle input. You know this child, Inspector. You've seen his experiences. Your perspective should matter. My perspective is that Harry should have a say in where he lives. He spent 7 years having no control over anything. The worst thing we could do is shuffle him to yet another placement without consulting him. Amelia nodded slowly. I can work with that. The door to Chen's office burst open. Davies stood in the doorway, slightly out of breath. Ma'am, we have a problem. The Dursley arraignment, something's happening. The little whinging magistrate's court was a modest building, more accustomed to traffic violations and petty disputes than cases that made national news. Today, it was surrounded by reporters, photographers, and a crowd of onlookers drawn by the sensational details that had leaked to the press. Chen pushed through the crowd with Amelia beside her, both of them ignoring the shouted questions and flashing cameras. Inside, the courthouse hallway was packed: police, solicitors, court officials, and a handful of people whose robes marked them as magical, trying unsuccessfully to blend in. The Dursleys had been brought from holding for their arraignment. Vernon, red-faced and belligerent, was loudly proclaiming his innocence to anyone who would listen. Petunia sat rigid and pale, her eyes fixed on some middle distance, her hands clasped in her lap. But something was wrong. Chen spotted it immediately: the way the prosecutor was conferring urgently with the judge's clerk, the way certain court officials were glancing at Vernon with expressions of confusion rather than condemnation. What's happening? She demanded, approaching the prosecutor, a young man named Davies, no relation to the sergeant, who she'd worked with on several previous cases. I don't know, Davies said, and his voice was shaky. Something's changed. The arraignment was going normally, and then Vernon Dursley started talking about his nephew, and suddenly, he stopped. His face had gone pale. Suddenly what? I can't remember. Chen felt ice slide down her spine. What do you mean, you can't remember? I know there was something important. Something about the evidence. But when I try to focus on it, it's just blank. Like fog. Davies shook his head, frustrated. I've been doing this for years. I don't forget details. But I'm standing here, and I can't remember why this case matters. Chen grabbed his arm. The photographs. The medical evidence. The documented injuries. I know we have photographs. I know there's documentation. But I can't. He trailed off, his expression increasingly distressed. What's happening to me? Chen turned to Amelia, who had been watching the exchange with growing alarm. Your people. The memory modification, this isn't us, Amelia said sharply. Obliviation doesn't work like this. It's precise, you remove specific memories, not general awareness. And we agreed to stand down. Fudge was annoyed, but he accepted that conventional methods had failed. Then who? A commotion at the front of the courtroom cut her off. Vernon Dursley had risen to his feet, his face triumphant. You see, he bellowed. You see. The boy's a liar, always has been. Made up stories to get attention, to cause trouble for decent, hard-working people. We took him in out of the goodness of our hearts, and this is how he repays us. People were nodding. Chen watched in horror as heads throughout the courtroom bobbed in agreement, as expressions of outrage shifted to skepticism, as the tide of public opinion turned in real time. She pushed forward, planting herself in front of Vernon. I saw it, she said, loudly enough to be heard throughout the room. I saw your belt hitting him. I felt the inside of that cupboard. I know exactly what you did, because your nephew showed me. Vernon's smugness faltered. Around the room, the dreamy confusion on people's faces flickered. Some looked at Chen with renewed interest, others seemed to be struggling against something they couldn't name. She's mad, Vernon said, but his voice had lost its confidence. The boys got her convinced of his lies, no. Chen felt something shifting inside her, the same sensation she'd experienced when Harry projected his memories. But this time, she was in control. I'm going to tell you what I saw. And you're going to understand. She began to speak. Amelia watched, astonished, as Margaret Chen did something that should have been impossible. The Muggle detective was projecting. Not with the raw, uncontrolled power of Harry's ability, but with something subtler, a focused intensity that cut through the magical interference blanketing the courtroom like a blade through fog. She described the cupboard in vivid detail, the dust, the darkness, the way the sloped ceiling forced a child to curl into himself. She described the scars on Harry's back, the malnutrition, the fractures that had healed crooked because no one had taken him to a hospital. She described the fear in his eyes and the courage it had taken for him to walk 3 miles in the middle of the night to ask strangers for help. And as she spoke, people remembered. The prosecutor's confusion cleared. He straightened, shuffling his papers, his professional focus returning. The court officials shook their heads as though waking from sleep. The crowd's sympathetic murmurs toward Vernon turned to disgusted mutters. Whatever enchantment had been cast on this courtroom, Chen was breaking it. Through sheer force of will and the reflected power of Harry's truth. Amelia scanned the room, looking for the source of the interference. There, in the back corner. A man in a dark cloak, his face partially hidden, his wand concealed but not completely invisible to someone who knew what to look for. He was watching Chen with an expression of frustrated concentration, his lips moving in silent incantation. She caught the eye of 2 Aurors she'd brought as backup and jerked her head toward the cloaked figure. They moved through the crowd with practiced subtlety. The figure noticed them too late. He tried to disapparate, the crack of displaced air echoed through the room, but anti-apparition wards snapped into place, courtesy of Amelia's preparation. The Aurors had him by the arms before he could try again. Dawlish, Amelia said coldly, approaching the captured wizard. What a surprise. John Dawlish, Auror 3rd class, Ministry loyalist, and, Amelia now realized, someone's errand boy. He'd been in her department for 15 years, competent enough but never exceptional, the sort of man who followed orders without asking questions. Madam Bones, I can explain, save it. Amelia gestured to her Aurors. Take him to the Ministry holding cells. I'll deal with him after this. Dawlish was dragged away, still protesting. Amelia turned back to the courtroom, where Chen had finished speaking and the arraignment was proceeding normally, charges read, bail denied, trial date set. Vernon Dursley's bluster had collapsed entirely, he was pale and sweating, finally understanding that his years of cruelty had consequences he couldn't talk his way out of. Petunia watched him be led away without expression. When her own charges were read, she said only one thing, I want to make a statement. About the boy. About what we were told to do. The interrogation room at the police station had become a joint operation, Chen on one side of the table, Amelia on the other, Petunia Dursley facing them both. The woman had aged a decade in the past few days. Her sharp features had gone hollow, her immaculate appearance replaced by jail-provided clothes and unwashed hair. But her eyes were alert, calculating. I need assurances, she said. If I tell you everything, I need to know it will matter. This isn't a negotiation, Chen said flatly. You starved and abused a child for 7 years. You're going to prison. The only question is how long. You don't understand. Petunia's voice cracked. We didn't have a choice. He made sure of it. Who? Petunia was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, Her words came out in a rush, as though a dam had broken. Dumbledore. He came to us the night they left the boy. Didn't knock, didn't ask permission, just appeared in our kitchen like we'd invited him. He told us about my sister's death, about the magic, and he said Harry had to stay with us. That it was the only way to keep him safe from the people who had killed Lily. Chen glanced at Amelia, who nodded slightly. This matched what McGonagall had told them. We said no, Petunia continued. Vernon wanted nothing to do with it, with any of it. And I. She swallowed. I hated my sister. I won't pretend otherwise. She was the special one, the witch, and I was just ordinary Petunia. When she died, I thought I was finally free of all that strangeness. But Dumbledore wouldn't accept our refusal. What did he do? He did something. Waved his wand and spoke words I didn't understand. And after that, we couldn't say no. Every time we tried to send the boy away, every time we thought about calling the authorities, something stopped us. It was like there was a wall in our minds, preventing us from taking action. Chen's jaw tightened. You're saying he compelled you magically to keep Harry? Yes. But that's not all. Petunia's hands were shaking now. There was someone else. Someone who came later. After Dudley started school and Harry started doing things. Freakish things, like Lily used to do. Who? I don't know his name. He wore black robes and a silver mask, just his eyes visible, cold as ice. He came when Vernon was at work and Dudley was asleep. He told me that the boy needed to be controlled. Kept weak. That if he grew too strong, too confident, he would become dangerous. He said they were watching us, and if we didn't do what was necessary, they would hurt Dudley. Amelia leaned forward. A silver mask. Death Eater regalia. Petunia flinched at the term. He never used that word. But yes, I knew what he was. Lily had told me about them once, the followers of the Dark Lord. I thought they were all dead or imprisoned after that night. Some escaped, Amelia said grimly. Some were never caught. He visited me 3 more times over the years. Each time, he reinforced his instructions. Keep the boy small. Keep him afraid. Don't let him believe he's special. Petunia's voice broke. I'm not making excuses. Vernon didn't need magical compulsion to be cruel, that was always in him, and maybe in me too. But what we did, it wasn't entirely our choice. Someone was pulling our strings from the beginning. Chen sat back, processing this. If Petunia was telling the truth, and the raw emotion in her voice suggested she was, then the Dursleys' abuse was part of something larger. A conspiracy to keep Harry Potter vulnerable. To prevent him from becoming whatever his enemies feared he might be. Who knew about these visits? Chen asked. Did you tell anyone? How could I? Who would believe me? And even if they did, I was too afraid. The man in the mask made it very clear what would happen if I talked. He said he had people everywhere, in the government, in the police, even among the freaks. He said no one could protect me if I betrayed them. Amelia's expression had gone hard. Describe him. Everything you can remember. Height, build, voice, any distinctive features. Petunia closed her eyes, calling up memories she'd clearly tried to bury. Tall. Thin but not frail, there was strength in the way he moved. His voice was low, cultured. He spoke like someone used to being obeyed. And his eyes, gray, I think, or very light blue. Cold. When he looked at me, I felt like he was seeing through me, like I wasn't a person to him, just a tool. Amelia's face had gone pale. Did he carry a cane? Black, with a silver handle? Yes. How did you, Lucius Malfoy? Amelia's voice was barely above a whisper. Gods, it was Malfoy all along. The name meant nothing to Chen, but from Amelia's reaction, it clearly meant a great deal. "Who is Lucius Malfoy?" Amelia took a moment to compose herself before answering. "One of the wealthiest wizards in Britain. A former Death Eater who claimed to have been under mind control during the war. He was never prosecuted, too much money, too many connections, too little evidence. He spent the last 7 years rehabilitating his reputation, positioning himself as a philanthropist and political moderate. And you think he's been secretly working to keep Harry weak? It makes sense. If Voldemort, the Dark Lord, returns, his followers would want to ensure that the child who defeated him couldn't do so again. Keeping Harry ignorant of his heritage, beaten down and powerless, it's exactly the kind of long game Malfoy would play." Chen turned back to Petunia. "Would you testify to this? In court, on the record?" Petunia hesitated. "If you can protect my son." "Dudley had nothing to do with any of this, he's just a child. Promise me he won't be punished for what Vernon and I did." "Your son participated in the abuse. There are witnesses, other children from Harry's school who saw him leading attacks. He learned it from us. From watching his father, from being told that Harry deserved it. He's 11 years old, don't destroy his life for our failures." Chen considered this. It was true that prosecuting Dudley would be complicated, juvenile cases were handled differently, and a decent defense attorney could argue that the boy had been raised to believe cruelty was acceptable. But the idea of letting him escape consequences entirely sat poorly with her. "I'll advocate for counseling and rehabilitation rather than prosecution," she said finally. "But that's contingent on your full cooperation. I want everything you know, every visit from this masked man, every instruction you received, every detail you can remember. And I want you to testify, publicly, about what you've told us here." Petunia nodded slowly. "Yes. I'll do it. Whatever you need." "Good." Chen stood. "We'll have someone take your formal statement. In the meantime, you'll remain in custody, for your own protection as much as anything." She and Amelia stepped out of the interrogation room, closing the door behind them. "Malfoy," Amelia said again, her voice tight with controlled fury. "I've suspected him for years. Everyone has. But we've never been able to prove anything. You can now. We have a witness, testimony, a direct connection to Harry's abuse. It won't be enough. Not with his money, his lawyers, his connections. He'll claim Petunia is lying, that she's trying to shift blame. He'll say he's never owned a silver mask in his life." Amelia shook her head. "We need more. We need evidence that can't be dismissed." Chen thought for a moment. "Harry. If he could project his aunt's memories the way he projects his own, that's not how his ability works. At least, not as we understand it. He shares his own experiences, not others. Then we find another way." Malfoy visited Petunia multiple times over several years. "There must be traces, magical signatures, witnesses, something we can use." "There might be. If I can get access to the Dursley home and the right detection equipment." Amelia paused. "This is going to require resources. Official support. And that means convincing the Wizengamot to authorize an investigation into one of its most influential members. Can you do that?" Amelia's smile was thin and fierce. "Watch me." The Wizengamot chamber was an impressive space, circular, tiered with benches rising toward a vaulted ceiling, dominated by a central podium where the accused would stand. Ancient magic hummed in the stones, detection spells and truth enchantments layered over centuries to ensure that justice was done. At least, that was the theory. Amelia knew the reality was more complicated. She stood before the assembled Wizengamot, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes upon her. Politicians, judges, academics, hereditary members whose families had held seats for generations, they watched her with expressions ranging from interest to hostility. Minister Fudge sat in the high chair, his face carefully neutral. He'd been furious when Amelia announced her intention to call this emergency session, even more furious when she told him why. But he hadn't been able to stop her. The law was clear that the head of magical law enforcement could convene the Wizengamot for matters of urgent criminal importance. "Madam Bones," Fudge said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "You have called this assembly to discuss the Potter situation. The floor is yours." Amelia didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Esteemed members, I come before you with evidence of a conspiracy that reaches into the highest levels of our society. 7 years ago, Harry Potter, the boy who lived, was placed in the care of his Muggle relatives. You know this. What you may not know is that his placement was deliberately sabotaged from within our own community." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Amelia pressed on. "The Dursley family did not simply neglect young Harry. They abused him systematically: beatings, starvation, confinement. The evidence is irrefutable: Muggle medical records documenting malnutrition and healed fractures, photographs of injuries, and most significantly, testimony from witnesses who have experienced Harry's memories directly through his unprecedented magical ability. An ability that has yet to be verified by appropriate authorities," someone called from the upper benches. "I have experienced it myself, as have numerous Muggle officials. Our obliviators have confirmed that memories shared through Harry's ability resist modification, a phenomenon never before documented. This isn't speculation, it's fact. What does this have to do with a conspiracy?" The speaker was Lucius Malfoy himself, seated in his hereditary position, his expression politely curious. "Surely the Dursleys' crimes are a Muggle matter." Amelia turned to face him directly. "The conspiracy, Lord Malfoy, involves the deliberate manipulation of the Dursley family by a wizard wearing Death Eater regalia. Petunia Dursley has testified that a man in a silver mask visited her multiple times over the years, instructing her to keep Harry weak and afraid, threatening harm to her son if she didn't comply." The murmurs grew louder. Malfoy's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his pale eyes. "A wild accusation," he said smoothly. "Made by a woman facing criminal charges who has obvious motivation to shift blame. Perhaps. That's why I'm requesting authorization to investigate. If Mrs. Dursley is lying, an examination of her home will prove it. There will be no traces of magical intrusion, no residue of the visits she describes. But if she's telling the truth?" Amelia paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "Then someone in this room may be responsible for years of systematic child abuse." The chamber erupted. Members shouted questions, accusations, demands for clarification. Fudge banged his gavel repeatedly, calling for order. "This is outrageous." Malfoy had risen to his feet, his composure finally cracking. "You're suggesting that one of us, a member of this august body, was involved in harming the boy who lived?" "I'm suggesting that the evidence warrants investigation," Amelia said calmly. "Surely you're not opposed to that, Lord Malfoy. If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear." "I find it interesting," another voice cut through the chaos, "that Lord Malfoy is so quick to oppose an investigation he claims will exonerate him." The speaker was Augusta Longbottom, matriarch of the ancient and noble house of Longbottom, her vulture-topped hat as distinctive as her sharp tongue. Her grandson had been born the same year as Harry Potter, and she had particular views about those who had escaped justice after the last war. "I second Madame Bones' request," Augusta continued. "Let the investigation proceed. Let the truth come out. If there are Death Eaters walking free among us, using their positions to harm children, we deserve to know." The vote was closer than it should have been. But in the end, the political reality was simple: no one wanted to be seen opposing an investigation into child abuse. The motion passed, and Amelia had her authorization. As the session adjourned, she caught Malfoy's eye across the chamber. His expression was composed again, his brief flash of anger hidden behind a mask of aristocratic disdain. But his eyes were calculating. Dangerous. The eyes of a man who was already planning his next move. The game was on. Harry had been watching the proceedings through a borrowed pensieve, projected onto a viewing screen in the Ministry's protected witness suite. Di Chen sat beside him, having been given special dispensation to accompany him, an unprecedented arrangement that had required Amelia's personal intervention. "That's him," Harry said quietly, pointing at Malfoy's image. "I've seen him before." Chen turned to him sharply. "Where? When?" Harry frowned, searching his memory. "I don't know exactly. It's not a clear image, more like a feeling. But when I saw his face, something recognized him." "Something in your memories?" "Maybe. Or maybe something from before the memories I can access." Harry's expression was troubled. "The night my parents died, I have flashes of it, but they don't make sense. Green light, a cold laugh, someone screaming. And sometimes I see faces, but they're blurry, like looking through dirty glass." "Harry." Chen chose her words carefully. "Do you think you might be able to focus on those flashes? Try to see them more clearly." "I've tried. When I do, my head hurts and the images just get more confused." He touched his scar absently. "But lately, since I told you everything, since I started using my ability on purpose, it feels like something's waking up. Like there are doors in my mind that have been locked, and they're starting to open." Chen exchanged a glance with Amelia, who had entered the suite during their conversation. The older witch's expression was deeply concerned. "Harry," Amelia said gently, "your ability is unprecedented. We don't fully understand how it works or what its limits are. I'd like you to speak with some researchers from the Department of Mysteries, people who specialize in unusual magical phenomena. Will it help catch the people who hurt me? It might help us understand what you can do, which could certainly assist the investigation." Harry considered this for a moment, then nodded. "All right. But I want Detective Chen there too. She's the only adult who's never lied to me." Chen felt something tighten in her chest. The trust in Harry's voice, the matter-of-fact way he said it, "never lied to me," as if that was such a rare quality that it merited special mention. "I'll be there," she promised. "Whatever happens next, you won't face it alone." The Department of Mysteries occupied the lowest level of the Ministry of Magic, accessible only through a black door at the end of a long corridor. The Unspeakables, the researchers who worked there, were famous for their secrecy, their strange experiments, and their indifference to normal Ministry politics. Chen had expected some kind of laboratory, cold and clinical. What she found was more like a library crossed with a museum, shelves stretching toward invisible ceilings, artifacts humming with power behind glass cases, doorways leading to spaces that shouldn't geometrically fit within the building's footprint. The Unspeakable assigned to assess Harry was a woman named Croaker, no first name given, no title offered. She wore gray robes that seemed to shift when you weren't looking directly at them, and her face had the ageless quality that Chen was learning to associate with powerful magic users. "Fascinating," Croaker murmured, studying Harry through a monocle that showed different colors depending on the angle. "His magical core is unusual. Layered. I see his own signature, of course, but there's something else beneath it. Something that shouldn't be there." "What does that mean?" Chen asked. "It means he carries more than his own magic." Croaker lowered the monocle, her expression intent. "Mr. Potter, do you know what a Horcrux is?" Harry shook his head. "It's a form of dark magic, possibly the darkest. A wizard splits their soul and anchors a piece of it to an object, granting them a form of immortality. The object becomes infected, in a sense. It carries the essence of its creator." Chen felt a chill run down her spine. "Are you saying Harry is infected with something?" "I'm saying his magical signature shows traces of another soul. Damaged, fragmented, but present." Croaker's eyes never left Harry's face. "The night Voldemort tried to kill you, Mr. Potter, his killing curse rebounded. The official history says it destroyed him. But dark magic of that magnitude doesn't simply disappear. Some of it had to go somewhere. Harry's hand went to his scar again, unconsciously. My scar. It hurts sometimes. When I have dreams about green light and a cold voice. The connection point, Croaker said, nodding. A piece of Voldemort's soul, anchored in your flesh. It's been dormant for 7 years, but your recent awakening, the development of your memory projection ability, has begun to stir it. What does that mean for Harry? Chen demanded. Is he in danger? He's always been in danger. But this explains several things, including why certain parties might want him kept weak. If Voldemort has Horcruxes, he isn't truly dead. He's waiting. And if he returns, the fragment in Mr. Potter's scar could become a liability, or an asset, depending on one's perspective. Can you remove it? Harry asked. His voice was steady, but Chen could see the fear in his eyes. The piece of his soul. Can you take it out of me? Croaker was silent for a long moment. That is a very complex question, Mr. Potter. Horcrux removal typically requires the destruction of the host object. In your case, you'd have to kill him, Chen said flatly. Not necessarily. There are theoretical alternatives, rituals, sacrificial magic, willing soul transfer. But they're untested, dangerous, and might not work. Croaker met Harry's eyes with something like compassion. For now, the safest course is to strengthen your own magical core. The more powerful you become, the more contained the fragment will be. Your mother's sacrifice created protections that have been keeping it dormant. We need to ensure those protections remain strong. The blood protections, Amelia said. She'd been listening from the doorway, her expression grim. The ones tied to his residence with blood relatives. Precisely. With the Dursleys incarcerated, those protections are failing. Mr. Potter needs a new anchor, someone who shares his blood and can provide the same kind of sacrifice-based magic. There is no one, Harry said quietly. My parents were only children. The Dursleys are my only relatives. Magical adoption creates blood ties, Croaker said thoughtfully. Under certain ritual conditions. It would need to be someone powerful, someone willing to sacrifice significantly for your protection. She paused. And, ideally, someone the ministry can't easily control or pressure. The door to the chamber opened, and a new voice spoke from the threshold. I believe I might be able to assist with that. Chen turned to see an old man with a long white beard and half-moon spectacles, wearing robes that sparkled with silver threads. His expression was solemn, but there was something in his eyes, guilt, determination, or perhaps both. Professor Dumbledore, Harry said. His voice was carefully neutral, but Chen noticed how his body tensed, how his hands curled into fists at his sides. Hello, Harry. Dumbledore stepped into the room, ignoring the protective way Chen moved to position herself between him and the boy. I owe you a great many apologies, and a great many explanations. But first, I need to tell you something I should have told you 7 years ago. What's that? Dumbledore's eyes were very bright, very blue, and very old. The truth, Harry. About your parents, about Voldemort, about the prophecy that marked you for death before you were born. Everything I've kept from you, trying to protect you, only to fail at the one protection that mattered most. He conjured a chair and sat down, suddenly looking every one of his many years. It's time you understood what you're truly facing. And why some people want so desperately to control you. The story took hours to tell. Voldemort's rise to power. The Order of the Phoenix. A prophecy made in a dusty pub, overheard by the wrong ears, setting in motion events that would claim countless lives. 2 families marked for death, the Potters and the Longbottoms, because their sons were born as the 7th month died. A spy who betrayed the Potters to their enemy. A sacrifice that invoked magic older than wands. And at the center of it all, a baby in a crib, screaming as green light filled the room, somehow surviving what no one had ever survived before. Harry listened without interrupting, his face growing paler with each revelation. When Dumbledore finished, a heavy silence filled the chamber. "You knew," Harry said finally. His voice was barely above a whisper. "You knew there was a piece of his soul in me. You knew the Dursleys would hate me. You knew I was being abused, your instruments told you, and you did nothing. I believed, you believed I needed to be kept weak." Harry stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the stone floor. "Just like the Death Eaters did. Just like Malfoy wanted. You had different reasons, but you wanted the same thing, a Harry Potter who was scared and small and didn't know what he was capable of. I wanted you to be protected, you wanted to control me." Harry's voice rose, and with it, his power. The air in the chamber seemed to thicken, to press inward, as his emotions reached out and touched everyone present. And suddenly, they all felt it. Dumbledore's perspective cascaded through them, his calculations, his fears, his genuine love for a boy he'd never let himself know. They felt his certainty that Voldemort would return, his belief that Harry needed to sacrifice himself to destroy the soul fragment, his terrible, compassionate conviction that the boy's death was the only path to victory. They felt his grief over that conviction. His hope that somehow, impossibly, Harry might survive even that final sacrifice. His desperate rationalization that a loveless childhood was acceptable because it would make the eventual sacrifice easier, no ties, no deep connections, nothing to make Harry fight to live when he needed to die. The projection ended as abruptly as it began, leaving everyone gasping. "You were going to let me die," Harry said. There was no anger in his voice now, only a terrible, crystalline understanding. "You were raising me like a lamb for slaughter. I was looking for alternatives." Dumbledore's voice was broken. "I never stopped looking, but you weren't hopeful. You didn't really believe there was another way." Harry took a step back, then another. "I trusted you. When I was lying in that cupboard, dreaming of someone who would come and save me, I imagined someone like you, wise, powerful, kind. Someone who would see what was happening and make it stop. Harry, I'm done being other people's tool. I'm done being sacrificed for causes I never chose." Harry turned to Chen, to Amelia, to Croaker. "I want to learn about my magic. I want to understand what I can do and how to control it. I want to find every Death Eater who escaped justice and every person who helped them. And I want to do it myself, not as someone's weapon, but as myself." He looked back at Dumbledore, and his eyes were older than any 7-year-old should be. "You can help me, or you can get out of my way. But you will never make decisions about my life again. Do you understand?" Dumbledore bowed his head. When he raised it, there were tears on his cheeks. "I understand, Harry. And I will do whatever I can to earn your forgiveness, even knowing I may never deserve it." Harry didn't respond. He simply turned and walked out of the chamber, his small figure straight-backed and resolute. Chen followed him, because she'd made a promise, and because she knew that whatever came next, Harry Potter was going to need someone in his corner who had nothing to gain and nothing to lose. Behind them, the most powerful wizard in Britain sat alone with his grief, wondering if he'd finally destroyed the one thing he'd spent 7 years trying to save. That night, Lucius Malfoy received a visitor. His manor was warded against intrusion, protected by spells that had accumulated over centuries of paranoid occupation. No one should have been able to enter his study without his knowledge, let alone appear in his chair as if they'd always been there. And yet, "You've made a mess of things, Lucius." The voice was soft, almost gentle, but it carried an edge that made Malfoy's blood run cold. He knew that voice. He'd spent years trying to forget it, telling himself its owner was gone forever, that the dark times were past. "My lord, don't." The figure in the chair leaned forward, and the firelight revealed features that were wrong, too smooth, too pale, with eyes that gleamed red in the shadows. "I've been watching, Lucius. Waiting. And I must say, your stewardship of our cause has been disappointing. The boy was kept weak, just as you commanded. Ignorant of his heritage, abused by muggles, broken in spirit, and yet here we are. Voldemort's lipless mouth curved in something that was not quite a smile. The boy has escaped. He's told the Muggles everything. He's developed abilities we never anticipated. And worst of all, he's projecting his memories to anyone who listens, including the night I tried to kill him. Malfoy felt sweat bead on his forehead. My lord, there were complications, there were failures. Your failures. Voldemort rose from the chair in a movement that was eerily fluid. I've spent years as less than a ghost, Lucius. Clinging to existence through anchors you know nothing about. Waiting for the opportunity to return. And now that opportunity is threatened because you couldn't control one small boy. What would you have me do? Voldemort moved closer, and the temperature in the room dropped. I would have you fix this. The inquiry into Harry Potter's abuse must be derailed. The Muggle investigator must be dealt with. And the boy himself must be brought under our influence before his abilities develop further. The blood protections are failing. Why do you think I've chosen now to make contact? Voldemort's smile widened. Harry Potter is vulnerable for the first time in 7 years. His mother's sacrifice is weakening. If we act quickly, we can take him before anyone realizes the danger. Take him. But the prophecy says he has the power to vanquish me. It doesn't say he will use it. Voldemort's eyes gleamed with terrible anticipation. Imagine, Lucius, if the boy who lived became our greatest weapon instead of our greatest threat. If his memory projection ability, that remarkable, unprecedented gift, was turned to our purposes. We could rewrite history. We could make everyone see what we want them to see. Malfoy felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. That would require breaking him completely. Something your Muggle pawns were supposed to accomplish. Since they failed, we'll have to be more direct. Voldemort moved toward the window, gazing out at the darkness beyond. Gather our friends, Lucius. It's time to remind the wizarding world that I am not so easily defeated. He turned back, and for a moment, his form flickered, revealing something even less human beneath the pale facade. And Lucius? Don't fail me again. You wouldn't like the consequences. He vanished, leaving Malfoy alone with his fear and his racing thoughts. The Dark Lord had returned. And everything Lucius had built, his reputation, his power, his carefully maintained innocence, was about to be put to the ultimate test. In the children's home in Surrey, Harry woke from a nightmare. His scar was burning. His head was full of images that didn't belong to him, a dark room, a cold voice, plans being made in shadows. He clutched his forehead and gasped for breath, trying to separate his own thoughts from the invasive presence pushing at the edges of his mind. Something was waking up. Something that had been sleeping in his scar for 7 years. And it was angry. Harry forced himself to breathe slowly, to center his thoughts, to push back against the intrusion. He thought of Detective Chen and her promise to help him. He thought of Amelia Bones and her fierce determination to find justice. He thought of his own resolution to never be controlled again. The presence retreated, reluctantly, like a tide being pushed back by sheer force of will. But Harry knew it would return. Whatever piece of Voldemort lived inside him, it was getting stronger. And somewhere out there, the rest of Voldemort was getting stronger too. The game had changed. The stakes had risen. And Harry Potter, 7 years old, scarred, abused, but unbroken, was going to have to grow up very fast indeed. He lay back down, but he didn't sleep again that night. Instead, he planned. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3, The Weight of Evidence. 2 weeks after the Wizengamot authorized Amelia Bones' investigation, the magical examination of No. 4 Privet Drive began. Chen stood on the pavement outside the Dursley home, watching a team of wizards cast detection spells that made the air shimmer like heat rising from summer concrete. The neighbors had been told that a gas leak required evacuation of the immediate area, a lie that sat poorly with Chen's professional ethics, but one she'd accepted as necessary given the alternative. 17 distinct magical signatures, the lead investigator reported to Amelia. Most are old, residual traces from the blood wards Dumbledore established. But there are at least 4 that don't match any known protective enchantment. Can you identify them? 2 are standard concealment charms, the kind used to hide magical activity from detection. 1 is a compulsion matrix, heavily degraded but still partially active. The 4th. The wizard hesitated. The 4th is dark magic, Madame Bones. Very dark. It's centered on the cupboard under the stairs. Chen felt her stomach turn. The cupboard. Where Harry had spent so much of his childhood, locked away in darkness. What kind of dark magic? Amelia's voice was tight. Soul magic. Nothing I've ever encountered directly, but the signature matches theoretical descriptions of Horcrux residue. The investigator looked shaken. Someone was using that cupboard to amplify a soul connection. Every moment the boy spent in there, surrounded by that enchantment, would have strengthened the link between him and whatever soul fragment he carries. Voldemort, Chen said flatly. Someone was using Harry's prison to make his connection to Voldemort stronger. That's the implication, yes. Amelia closed her eyes for a moment, visibly controlling her reaction. When she opened them, her expression was carved from stone. Document everything. I want comprehensive records of every magical trace in this house, who cast them, when they were cast, and what their purpose was. This evidence will be presented to the Wizengamot, and I will not have Malfoy or anyone else dismissing it as speculation. The investigation continued for hours. Chen wandered through the house while the magical team worked, seeing it through new eyes, the obsessive normalcy, the photographs that featured only the Dursley nuclear family, the complete absence of any sign that a second child had ever lived here. She found herself standing in front of the cupboard door. Someone had pried it open during the initial search, it hung ajar now, revealing the narrow space where Harry had spent so many nights. The mattress was still there. Thin, stained, too small for a growing child. A single blanket, threadbare and gray. The broken soldiers Harry had mentioned, lined up on a shelf like silent witnesses. Chen had seen crime scenes that turned her stomach. She'd investigated murders, assaults, the worst that humans could do to each other. But standing here, in this tiny prison, she felt something shift in her chest, a cold, implacable fury that settled into her bones and refused to leave. This was evil. Not the dramatic evil of villains in stories, but the mundane evil of cruelty normalized, of a child's suffering treated as routine. The Dursleys had done this. And someone, Malfoy, Voldemort, whoever else was involved, had encouraged it, amplified it, turned it into a weapon. They would pay. All of them. Chen would make sure of it. The evidence report was delivered to the Wizengamot 3 days later. Chen attended the session as an official observer, seated in a gallery reserved for non-magical witnesses. Harry sat beside her, having insisted on being present despite Amelia's concerns. He wore wizarding robes for the first time, dark blue, simple, provided by McGonagall, and his expression was unreadable as he watched the proceedings unfold. The magical analysis confirms Mrs. Dursley's testimony, Amelia announced, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. At least 4 unauthorized enchantments were placed on the property at number 4 Privet Drive. 2 were concealment charms, likely intended to hide the other magical activity from ministry detection. 1 was a compulsion matrix targeting the adult residents, not strong enough to force specific actions, but sufficient to amplify existing resentments and reduce inhibitions against violence. Murmurs swept through the chamber. Chen watched Malfoy's face, but the man's expression remained carefully neutral. The 4th enchantment, Amelia continued, was dark magic of the highest order. Soul magic, specifically designed to strengthen a connection between Mr. Potter and a foreign soul fragment. This enchantment was centered on the cupboard where Mr. Potter was frequently confined. Its purpose was clear, to ensure that the piece of Voldemort's soul residing in Mr. Potter's scar grew stronger, not weaker, during his years of captivity. Now the murmurs became gasps. Several Wizengamot members turned pale, others leaned forward with expressions of horrified fascination. "This is speculation," Malfoy said, rising smoothly to his feet. "Dark magic signatures can be difficult to interpret. We have no proof that these enchantments were placed by anyone specific, or that their purpose was as claimed." "We have magical signature analysis," Amelia replied. "Each wizard's magic carries distinct characteristics, as unique as a fingerprint. 2 of the signatures found at Privet Drive match samples on file, one from the compulsion matrix, one from the soul magic enchantment." She paused, letting the tension build. The compulsion matrix was cast by Peter Pettigrew, believed dead since 1981. Shock rippled through the chamber. Chen didn't recognize the name, but from the reactions around her, it clearly meant something significant. "And the soul magic," someone called out. Amelia's gaze swept across the chamber, finally settling on Lucius Malfoy. The soul magic was cast by Lucius Malfoy, Lord of the ancient and noble house of Malfoy, seated member of this Wizengamot. Chaos erupted. Malfoy's denial was immediate, vehement, and utterly unconvincing to anyone watching his eyes rather than listening to his words. "This is a fabrication," he shouted over the din, "a political attack by my enemies, using forged evidence to destroy my reputation. I demand that this so-called analysis be examined by independent experts." "Your demand is noted," Amelia said coolly. "And it will be granted, after you've been taken into custody for questioning. You can't arrest me. I'm a member of this body. I have immunity that can be suspended by a 2/3 vote of the Wizengamot when evidence suggests involvement in crimes against magical children." Augusta Longbottom's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "I call for such a vote immediately." The vote was swift and decisive. Whatever protection Malfoy's wealth and connections usually provided, the evidence was too damning, the crime too visceral. A child had been tortured, magically and physically, and Malfoy's signature was all over the methods used. Aurors moved to take him into custody. Malfoy's composure finally cracked. He struggled, shouting threats and promises of retribution, his aristocratic mask slipping to reveal the desperate man beneath. And then his eyes found Harry. "You," he hissed. "You little freak, you'll pay for this. When my master returns, your master is a parasite living in my scar," Harry said. His voice was calm, carrying clearly through the chamber despite its quietness. "And I'm going to cut him out, one piece at a time. Starting with you." Something passed between them, a crackle of magical energy, a clash of wills. Malfoy flinched as though struck, and then the Aurors were dragging him away, and the moment passed. Chen put a hand on Harry's shoulder. "You okay?" Harry nodded slowly. "I saw something. When he looked at me, I saw inside his mind, just for a second. He's scared. Not of prison, not of the Wizengamot. He's scared of what happens when Voldemort finds out he failed. Can you do that on purpose? Look into people's minds? I don't know. It's never happened before." Harry frowned, considering. "But maybe I can learn." The interrogation of Lucius Malfoy lasted 3 days. At first, he refused to speak, demanding lawyers, citing ancient privileges, threatening everyone from the interrogators to the minister himself. But Amelia had anticipated this. She had something Malfoy hadn't counted on. Veritaserum. The truth potion was heavily regulated, usable only in cases of highest importance with Wizengamot authorization. The charges against Malfoy, conspiracy to commit child abuse, use of dark magic, suspected Death Eater activity, more than qualified. Under the potion's influence, the truth poured out of him. He had been contacted by Voldemort's spirit 3 years after the Dark Lord's fall. The entity that had once been the most feared wizard in Britain was reduced to a shade, a fragment clinging to existence through soul anchors hidden across the country. It had found Malfoy through his dark mark, the brand that linked all Death Eaters to their master, and had given him instructions. Keep the Potter boy weak. Ensure his magic remained undeveloped. Strengthen the soul connection, so that when Voldemort eventually returned to full power, he could use the boy as a vessel, a weapon, a sacrifice. Malfoy had obeyed. He had modified the blood wards Dumbledore placed, adding his own dark enchantments. He had visited Petunia Dursley, using threats and compulsion to ensure the abuse continued. He had monitored Harry's development through ministry contacts, intervening whenever the boy showed signs of magical strength. And he was not alone. "There are others," Malfoy said, his voice flat and mechanical under the Veritaserum. "Death Eaters who escaped justice, who pretended reformation, who have been working quietly to prepare for the Dark Lord's return. We have people in the ministry, in Hogwarts, in every major institution. When he rises again, we will be ready." "Names," Amelia demanded. "Give me names." The list was long. Some names were expected, known sympathizers, families with dark reputations. Others were shocking, respected officials, trusted educators, people who had rebuilt their lives after the war and were now revealed as sleeper agents for a cause they'd never truly abandoned. Chen, watching from behind a one-way observation charm, felt the scale of the conspiracy settle onto her shoulders. This wasn't just about Harry anymore. This was about an entire shadow network, embedded in wizarding society, waiting for the moment to strike. And at the center of it all, a monster who refused to stay dead. Harry's response to Malfoy's revelations was not what Chen expected. She found him in the Ministry's protected witness suite, sitting cross-legged on the floor with his eyes closed. The air around him seemed to shimmer slightly, as though heat were rising from his skin. "Harry." "I'm practicing," he said without opening his eyes. "Trying to understand what I felt when Malfoy looked at me. The way I saw into his mind, if I can learn to do it deliberately, I can help identify the other Death Eaters. I can see who's lying and who's telling the truth. That sounds dangerous. Everything about my life is dangerous." Harry opened his eyes, and Chen was struck by how old they looked. Not world-weary or cynical, just aware, in a way that children shouldn't have to be. "I've been thinking about what Dumbledore told me. About the prophecy, and the soul fragment, and all of it. And he was right about one thing, I'm connected to Voldemort. There's a piece of him inside me, and it's always going to be there until we figure out how to remove it safely. But he was wrong about what that means." Harry stood, moving with a grace that seemed new, more controlled than before. "Dumbledore thought the connection made me vulnerable. A weakness to be managed. But connections work both ways. If Voldemort can see through my eyes, maybe I can see through his. If his soul fragment can influence me, maybe I can influence it back. That sounds like it could go very wrong. It could. But sitting around waiting to be rescued went wrong for 7 years." Harry met her eyes steadily. "I'm done being passive. I'm done letting other people decide what I can and can't do. I have power, real power, and I'm going to learn how to use it." Chen considered him for a long moment. Her instinct was to protect, to caution, to urge him to let the adults handle things. But she'd spent enough time with Harry to know that approach would fail. He'd survived by taking action, by refusing to accept helplessness. Trying to make him passive now would only drive him to act alone, without guidance or support. "Then let's do it properly," she said finally. "I'll talk to Amelia and McGonagall. We'll find you teachers, people who can help you develop your abilities safely. Not to make you a weapon, but to make sure you can protect yourself." Harry's expression softened slightly. "You really aren't like the other adults." "I try not to be." Chen allowed herself a small smile. "Now, have you eaten anything today?" "I'm not hungry." "That wasn't what I asked." Harry almost smiled. "Almost. There's food in the kitchen. I was going to eat after I finished practicing. You're going to eat now. And then you're going to tell me everything you've figured out about your abilities, and we're going to make a plan together. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am." This time, the almost smile reached his eyes. Progress, Chen thought. Slow, fragile, but progress nonetheless. The trials began a week later. The Dursleys' Muggle trial proceeded first, a deliberate choice by Chen and Amelia to establish a foundation of evidence before the more complicated wizarding proceedings. The case was straightforward: overwhelming physical evidence, Harry's testimony, and the unprecedented memory projections that allowed judge and jury to experience the abuse firsthand. Vernon Dursley received 20 years. His bluster had long since faded. By the end of the trial, he was a shrunken figure, unable to meet anyone's eyes, confronted at last with the reality of what he'd done. Petunia received 5 years, reduced from the potential maximum in exchange for her cooperation. Her testimony about Malfoy's visits and the compulsion matrix had been crucial. The court recognized that while her culpability was real, she had not acted entirely of her own free will. Dudley, as Chen had promised, was remanded to juvenile rehabilitation rather than criminal prosecution. Child psychology experts testified that he had been systematically taught to see his cousin as less than human, a form of abuse in itself, though one that produced a perpetrator rather than a victim. He would receive counseling, education, and the chance to become something other than his father's son. Harry attended all 3 sentencings. He said nothing, asked no questions, showed no visible emotion. But Chen noticed how he watched each Dursley as judgment was passed, not with satisfaction or triumph, but with something harder to name. Understanding, perhaps. Or pity. Or simply the recognition that these people, who had loomed so large in his childhood fears, were ultimately small and sad and broken in their own ways. After Dudley's hearing, Harry approached his cousin in the corridor. The 2 boys hadn't spoken since Harry's escape. Dudley flinched when he saw Harry coming, his face going pale with something that looked like genuine fear. "I don't forgive you," Harry said quietly. "What you did, what you helped your parents do, I'm not going to pretend that's okay. But I understand that you were taught. That you didn't know any better because no one taught you better." Dudley swallowed hard. I'm sorry. I didn't." He trailed off, unable to find words. "I know." Harry studied his cousin's face with that unsettling perception he'd developed. "You're going to have a chance to be different now. A chance I never got, when we were growing up. Don't waste it." He walked away without waiting for a response. Chen followed, glancing back once to see Dudley standing frozen in the corridor, tears streaming down his round cheeks. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. But it might have been the first step towards something neither of them had the vocabulary for yet. The wizarding trials were more complicated. Malfoy's case had to account for both his specific crimes against Harry and his broader role in the Death Eater conspiracy. The Veritaserum testimony had provided names, but many of those named had powerful friends, plausible alibis, or simply enough money to make legal problems disappear. Amelia fought for every conviction. She called witnesses, presented evidence, subjected suspects to truth potion and memory extraction. Some cases succeeded, others slipped through the cracks, victims of the same corruption that had allowed Malfoy to operate freely for years. But the cumulative effect was unmistakable. By the time the trials concluded, 6 prominent wizards had been convicted of Death Eater activity. 4 ministry officials had been dismissed for corruption. The head of the Department of International Magical Cooperation had fled the country rather than face questioning. And at the center of it all, Lucius Malfoy received life imprisonment in Azkaban. The sentencing hearing was packed. Every seat in the Wizengamot chamber was filled, spectators stood in the aisles, craned their necks from the galleries, watched through magical viewing screens in overflow rooms. The fall of a great house was always compelling theater, and Malfoy's fall was more dramatic than most. Harry was asked to make a statement. He stood before the assembled Wizengamot, 7 years old, small and scarred and utterly composed, and he spoke. "I don't remember my parents," he said. "I have flashes, my mother's voice, my father's laugh, but no real memories. What I have instead is this. He touched his forehead, his scar. A piece of the man who killed them, anchored in my flesh. Every nightmare I've ever had, every time my scar burned with pain, every moment I've felt darkness pressing at the edges of my mind, that's his gift to me. He turned to face Malfoy directly. You helped him. You spent 7 years making sure I was weak, afraid, alone. You wanted me broken because a broken child is easier to control, easier to use, easier to kill. Malfoy said nothing. His face was gray, his eyes hollow. Whatever arrogance he'd once possessed had been stripped away by the proceedings. You failed, Harry continued. I'm not broken. I'm not weak. And I'm not going to be controlled by you or anyone else. When your master comes back, and he will come back, because monsters like him never stay dead, I'll be ready. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that seemed too heavy for a child. This isn't the end. It's just the beginning. And when the real fight comes, I hope you're still alive to see how wrong you were about me. He turned and walked out of the chamber without waiting for permission. Behind him, the Wizengamot pronounced sentence in voices that shook. That night, Chen found Harry on the roof of the Ministry building, staring up at the stars. Getting access had required several creative lies and one outright bribe, but she'd managed it. The roof was cold, wind cutting through her inadequate jacket, but Harry seemed unbothered. He sat on the parapet with his legs dangling over the edge, a 40-story drop beneath his feet, as calm as if he were perched on a park bench. That was quite a speech, Chen said, settling herself a safe distance from the edge. I meant every word. I know you did. That's what made it effective. She paused, choosing her words carefully. You're different than you were 3 weeks ago. More focused. More intense. Harry didn't respond for a long moment. When he did, his voice was distant. I can feel him now. Voldemort. Not all the time, but when I focus, when I reach for that connection, I can sense him. His anger, his hunger, his plans. A pause. He knows about the trials. He's furious. And he's accelerating his timeline. Accelerating toward what? A body. A real body, not the wraith he's been. There's a ritual, I don't know the details, but I know it requires certain ingredients. Blood of an enemy. Bone of a father. And Harry's hand went to his scar. Flesh of a servant. Peter Pettigrew, Chen said, remembering the name from Malfoy's confession. The one who cast the compulsion matrix. He's still out there. Still loyal. And he's been gathering what Voldemort needs. Harry turned to look at her, and in the darkness, his eyes seemed to glow faintly green. We have months, maybe less. Before he comes back for real. Then we use those months. We find Pettigrew. We stop the ritual. It won't matter. Harry's voice was soft, certain. Even if we stop this ritual, there will be another. Voldemort has Horcruxes, pieces of his soul hidden in objects around the country. As long as those exist, he can always come back. The only way to truly stop him is to destroy them all, and then destroy whatever's left of him. Including the piece in your scar. Harry was quiet for a long time. Including that. Yes. Chen felt the weight of it settle over her. This child, this 7-year-old boy, was talking about his own death as a necessary step in defeating a monster. And the worst part was, he might be right. We'll find another way, she said firmly. The unspeakables mentioned alternatives. Rituals, sacrificial magic, maybe. Harry didn't sound convinced. But even if we find a way to remove the Horcrux safely, I'll still have to face him eventually. The prophecy made sure of that. Neither can live while the other survives. One of us has to kill the other. That's just how it is. Prophecies aren't certainties. They're possibilities. And you've already defied expectations more than once. Harry smiled, a real smile, small but genuine. You sound like Professor McGonagall. She's been saying the same thing. Then she's a smart woman. Chen moved closer, carefully, and put her hand on Harry's shoulder. Listen to me. You've survived things that would break most adults. You've developed abilities that the greatest wizards in the world don't understand. And you've done all of that before your 8th birthday. She squeezed gently. Whatever's coming, you won't face it alone. You have people now, Amelia, McGonagall, me. Even Dumbledore, for all his mistakes, wants to help you. We're going to figure this out together. Harry leaned into the touch, just slightly, a child's instinctive response to comfort, breaking through the composure he'd built. I want to believe that. Then believe it. And tomorrow, we start planning. Not to sacrifice you, but to save you. Deal? Harry nodded slowly. Deal. They sat together on the roof until the stars began to fade, watching the sky lighten toward dawn, an unlikely pair bound by circumstance and choice. The war was coming. But for this moment, at least, neither of them had to face it alone. The morning brought news that changed everything. A fire at Malfoy Manor. The ancestral home of the House of Malfoy, one of the oldest and most heavily warded properties in magical Britain, burned to the ground overnight. Aurors arrived to find nothing but ash and rubble, the ancient protections overwhelmed by flames that burned with unnatural intensity. Narcissa Malfoy was found on the grounds, alive but catatonic. Her son Draco, 11 years old, was missing. And carved into the earth where the manor's front door had stood, in letters 6 feet high, was a message: the Dark Lord returns. All who betrayed him will suffer. The manhunt for Voldemort began in earnest. But as Aurors swept the countryside and ministry officials issued statements of reassurance, Chen couldn't shake the feeling that they were already too late. Voldemort had been planning this for years, longer than she'd been alive, longer than Harry had been alive. He wouldn't move openly unless he was confident of success. She found Harry in the witness suite, staring at a map of Britain spread across the table. Red pins marked known Death Eater locations. Blue pins marked possible Horcrux sites, based on Dumbledore's research and Harry's visions. Green pins marked places of significance to Voldemort's history, the orphanage where he'd grown up, the school where he'd learned magic, the places where his power had begun. He took Draco, Harry said without looking up. I saw it, last night, through the connection. He's going to use him as leverage against Malfoy, make sure his father doesn't reveal anything else, even in Azkaban. That boy is innocent. Voldemort doesn't care about innocent. He cares about useful. Harry's finger traced a line between two blue pins. I think I know where one of the Horcruxes is. A ring, something that belonged to his family. It's hidden in a village called Little Hangleton, in a house that used to belong to his mother's people. Harry, you can't just, I'm not going to do anything stupid. He finally looked up, and his expression was resolute. But someone needs to destroy that ring. If we start eliminating his Horcruxes, we weaken him. And if we weaken him enough, maybe we can stop him before he completes his ritual. That's Dumbledore's job. Or the Aurors. Dumbledore is brilliant, but he's old and he thinks in straight lines. The Aurors are brave, but they don't understand what they're dealing with. They've never felt Voldemort's mind the way I have. Harry stood, squaring his shoulders. I'm not going to fight him directly. I'm not stupid. But I can guide the people who can fight. I can show them where to look, what to watch for, when to strike. You're 7 years old. I'm the only person in the world with a direct connection to Voldemort's thoughts. Age doesn't matter if I'm the only one who can do what needs to be done. Chen wanted to argue. Every protective instinct she had screamed that this was wrong, that children shouldn't be soldiers, that Harry had already sacrificed enough. But she looked at his face, determined, intelligent, older than his years, and she understood that arguing would be pointless. Harry Potter had decided to fight. The only question was whether she would help him do it wisely, or leave him to figure it out alone. "I want to meet with Amelia and Dumbledore," she said finally. "Today. We're going to lay everything out, what you've seen, what you can do, what the plan is. And then we're going to make decisions together, as a team." Harry nodded. "Thank you. For trusting me. I'm trusting your judgment. Don't make me regret it." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "I'll try." The meeting convened in Dumbledore's office at Hogwarts, a space so cluttered with magical instruments that Chen had to navigate carefully to reach her chair. Amelia was already there, along with McGonagall and, surprisingly, Severus Snape. "Professor Snape has been working as a spy in Voldemort's ranks for years," Dumbledore explained at Chen's questioning look. "His position is precarious now, given recent events, but his knowledge of the Death Eater's operations is invaluable." Snape regarded Harry with an expression that was hard to read, not the hostility Chen had expected based on what she'd heard, but something more complex. Curiosity, perhaps, and a strange sort of grudging respect. "The boy has his mother's eyes," Snape said quietly. "I had hoped never to see them again. But here we are." Harry said nothing, but something passed between them, an acknowledgement of history, of loss, of complicated feelings that neither was ready to articulate. Dumbledore cleared his throat. "We have much to discuss. Harry, please share what you've learned through your connection to Voldemort." Harry told them everything. The ritual Voldemort was planning. The location of the ring Horcrux. The kidnapping of Draco Malfoy. The sense he had of Voldemort's timeline, his resources, his state of mind. When he finished, the room was silent. "If you're right about the ring's location," Dumbledore said slowly, "destroying it should be our first priority. I've spent years researching Horcruxes, I have some understanding of how to unmake them." "It's trapped," Harry said. "I can feel it through the connection. Whatever protections Voldemort placed on that ring, they're designed to kill anyone who touches it. Then we proceed carefully." Dumbledore's eyes were troubled but determined. "Severus, I need you to reach out to your contacts. Find out where Voldemort is operating from, what resources he's gathered, how close he is to performing the resurrection ritual. If I contact them now, they'll know my loyalties have shifted. My usefulness as a spy will end. Your usefulness as a spy may have already ended. Voldemort is not fool, he'll assume that anyone close to Malfoy is compromised." Dumbledore leaned forward. "The time for subtle games is past. We need intelligence, and we need it quickly." Snape nodded curtly. "I'll do what I can. Amelia, I need the Ministry's resources focused on finding Peter Pettigrew. He's essential to Voldemort's ritual, without him, the resurrection can't proceed. I'll assign our best trackers. But Pettigrew has been hiding for 15 years. He won't be easy to find." "He's a rat," Harry said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at him. "I mean that literally. He's an animagus, his form is a rat. That's how he faked his death, how he's been hiding all this time. He's probably been living as someone's pet, right under everyone's noses." Snape's expression shifted. "That would explain a great deal. I can try to sense him through the connection," Harry continued. "Voldemort thinks about Pettigrew sometimes, usually with contempt. If I can catch one of those moments, I might be able to pinpoint his location." "That's dangerous," McGonagall interjected. "Opening yourself to Voldemort's mind, even briefly, the risk of him noticing, of him using the connection against you, I know the risks. But sitting around being safe hasn't worked out very well for me so far." Harry met her eyes steadily. "I'm going to help, Professor. The only question is how." The room fell silent again. Chen watched the adult struggle with the same thing she'd struggled with, the knowledge that Harry was right, that his abilities made him uniquely valuable, and that using those abilities meant putting a child in harm's way. "We'll work together," Dumbledore said finally. "Harry will use his connection to gather intelligence, but never alone, always with supervision, always with safeguards in place. Inspector Chen, I'd like you to be present for these sessions. Your perspective as a non-magical observer may prove valuable. Chen nodded. I'll be there. Minerva, I need you to prepare Hogwarts. If Voldemort returns to full power, he may target the school, both as a symbolic victory and to prevent the next generation of witches and wizards from standing against him. I'll coordinate with the other heads of house. We'll have defenses in place within the week. Good. Dumbledore stood, suddenly seeming every one of his many years. We are, I believe, approaching a moment of great danger. But we are also, for the first time, approaching it together, Muggle and magical, young and old, united against a common enemy. That gives us strength. He looked at Harry, and something softened in his ancient eyes. I have made terrible mistakes, Harry. Mistakes that cost you dearly. I cannot undo them, but I can promise that from this moment forward, I will treat you as a partner, not a pawn. Your voice matters. Your choices matter. And when the time comes to face Voldemort, you will do so with every advantage we can provide. Harry considered him for a long moment. I don't forgive you yet. I don't know if I ever will. But I believe you want to help. And right now, that's enough. He held out his hand. Dumbledore shook it solemnly. And in that gesture, a child's hand clasped in an old man's, enemies becoming allies, a broken trust beginning its slow repair, Chen saw the faint outline of hope. The first intelligence session took place 2 days later, in a specially prepared room at Hogwarts. Harry sat in the center of a runic circle, surrounded by protective enchantments that would shield his mind if the connection became overwhelming. Chen sat nearby, watching for any sign of distress. Dumbledore and Snape stood at the edges of the room, ready to intervene if necessary. Remember, Dumbledore said, you're not trying to communicate with Voldemort. You're trying to observe. Think of his mind as a dark room with a keyhole, you want to peek through, not open the door. Harry nodded, closed his eyes, and reached for the connection. It was like touching ice. Cold spread through his mind, numbing his thoughts, and he felt himself being pulled toward something vast and dark and hungry, not toward, he told himself firmly. Through. I'm looking through, not entering. He focused, narrowing his awareness to a single point. And slowly, images began to form. A dark room. Stone walls, damp with moisture. A figure huddled in the corner, Draco Malfoy, pale and terrified, his fine robes torn and dirty. A voice, high and cold, your father's failure has cost us dearly. But you may yet prove useful. Blood of a Malfoy carries power, perhaps not the power I originally sought, but power nonetheless. A shuffling sound, and another figure came into view, a small, hunched man with watery eyes and twitching movements. Pettigrew. His silver hand gleamed in the torchlight as he approached Draco with something in his grip. Harry pulled back, gasping, the vision shattering like glass. What did you see? Chen was beside him immediately, her hand on his shoulder. Draco. He's alive, but, Harry swallowed hard. They're going to use him. In the ritual. His blood, because his father betrayed them. Snape made a sharp sound. The Malfoy bloodline carries ancient power. If Voldemort uses Draco as a substitute for blood of the enemy, the ritual might work anyway, Dumbledore finished grimly. Where are they, Harry? Could you see the location? Harry concentrated, trying to recall the details. Underground. Stone walls, like a dungeon. There was water dripping somewhere, I could hear it echoing. And I smelled something. Something familiar. What smell? Harry frowned, chasing the memory. Sulfur. Like rotten eggs. And underneath that, something else, a kind of mustiness. Like old bones. Snape's face had gone pale. The chamber. He's in the Chamber of Secrets. That's impossible, McGonagall said. The chamber was sealed after the last incident. No one can enter without speaking Parseltongue. The language of snakes. Snape turned to Harry. A language the Dark Lord speaks fluently. And, if I'm not mistaken, a language that Harry inherited through their connection. Everyone looked at Harry. I've heard snakes, he said slowly. At the zoo, once. They talked to me, and I talked back. I didn't think anything of it at the time. You're a Parselmouth. Dumbledore's voice was heavy. Another gift from Voldemort, carried through the soul fragment. And it means you could open the chamber, if we could find the entrance. It's in the school, Snape said. Somewhere in the castle. The last time it was opened was 50 years ago, by a student who spoke Parseltongue, a student who grew up to become the Dark Lord himself. Can you find it, Harry? Chen asked. Through the connection, or, however your abilities work. Harry closed his eyes again, reaching, not for Voldemort this time, but for something older. The school itself, its ancient stones, the magic woven into every brick and beam. He could feel Hogwarts like a living presence, vast and patient and full of secrets. One secret sang to him, called to him, a serpentine melody hidden in the foundations. The second floor, he said. There's a bathroom, a girl's bathroom. The entrance is there. Myrtle's bathroom, McGonagall breathed. Of course. The girl who died the last time the chamber was opened, her ghost haunts that very room. Then we know where to go. Dumbledore straightened, decision crystallizing in his eyes. We cannot assault the chamber directly, Voldemort will be expecting that, and we don't have enough information about his defenses. But we can prepare. Study the entrance. Develop a plan. What about Draco? Harry asked. We'll save him if we can. But Harry, Dumbledore met his eyes. Voldemort will not hesitate to use hostages. If we attack before we're ready, he may kill the boy just to prove a point. Then we get ready faster. Harry stood, squaring his shoulders. I'll keep watching through the connection. Every time he thinks about the ritual, the chamber, his plans, I'll see it. And when we know enough, we'll strike. And if he notices you watching? Harry's expression was cold, determined, older than his years. Then I'll give him something to watch back. The days that followed were a blur of preparation. Harry trained constantly, not in combat, but in control. His memory projection ability was developing rapidly, becoming more precise, more powerful. He could now share specific memories with specific people, show exactly what he wanted to show without the overwhelming flood of emotion that had characterized his early projections. More importantly, he was learning to read minds. It wasn't legilimency, the formal magical discipline that Snape had mastered, but something different. More intuitive, more emotional. When Harry focused on a person, he could sense their surface thoughts, their fears, their intentions. The ability worked on wizards and muggles alike, unaffected by occlumency shields or mental protections. You're not reading their thoughts, Dumbledore explained during one training session. You're reading their truth. The core of what they're feeling, beneath all the layers of deception and rationalization. It's a form of empathy, amplified by magic. Is it dangerous? Any power can be dangerous if misused. The question is whether you have the wisdom to use it well. Dumbledore studied him carefully. What do you feel when you read someone's truth, Harry? Harry considered this. It depends on the person. Some people are clear. What they say matches what they feel. Others are murky, their surface is different from their depths. And some people. He paused. Some people have darkness inside them. Things they've buried so deep they've almost forgotten them. And when you sense that darkness, what do you do? Nothing, usually. Everyone has dark thoughts sometimes. It doesn't mean they're going to act on them. Harry met Dumbledore's eyes. But if I sensed someone who was planning to hurt people, planning it actively, not just fantasizing, I'd tell someone who could stop them. Dumbledore nodded slowly. That is, I think, the right answer. Power without ethics is merely destruction. You're developing both. The praise felt strange, coming from the man who had orchestrated so much of Harry's suffering. But Harry could sense the genuine remorse behind Dumbledore's words, the deep desire to make amends. It didn't erase the past, nothing could do that, but it made the present more bearable. The break came 12 days after the Malfoy Manor fire. Harry was meditating in the prepared room, maintaining the light contact with Voldemort's mind that had become his daily practice, when suddenly the connection blazed open. Images poured through him, the chamber, the ritual preparations, and something new. A date. A time. A plan crystallizing into action. Harry gasped and jerked back into full awareness. 3 days, he said. The ritual is in 3 days. The new moon. Chen, who had been reading nearby, set down her book. You're sure? He's decided. I felt it, the moment of commitment. He's gathered everything he needs except one thing. What thing? Me. Harry's voice was flat. He needs my blood, blood of the enemy, forcibly taken. He's going to send people to grab me. Tonight. The alarm spread quickly. Within an hour, Hogwarts was in full lockdown. Aurors flooded the grounds, protective enchantments were strengthened, and Harry was moved to the most heavily warded location in the castle, the headmaster's office, surrounded by centuries of accumulated defenses. Chen stayed with him. She'd refused to leave, despite Amelia's suggestions that a non-magical person would be more liability than asset. He's my charge, Chen had said simply. I'm not abandoning him. Now they sat together in Dumbledore's cluttered office, waiting. The portraits on the walls watched with painted eyes, former headmasters and headmistresses murmuring among themselves about the unprecedented situation. You knew this was coming, Chen said quietly. I suspected. The ritual needs my blood, the prophecy marks me as Voldemort's enemy, so my blood fulfills that requirement. He was always going to try for me directly. And you didn't tell anyone? I told Dumbledore. He agreed that setting a trap was the best option. Chen stared at him. You're using yourself as bait. Yes. Harry's expression was calm, resolute. When they come for me, we'll be ready. The Death Eaters will be captured or killed. And then, with Voldemort's forces weakened, we'll assault the chamber before the ritual can proceed. That's an enormous risk. Everything about my life is an enormous risk. At least this time, I get to choose what I'm risking it for. Before Chen could respond, alarms began to shriek throughout the castle. The portraits started shouting, the magical instruments on Dumbledore's shelves spun wildly, and the wards around the office flared with golden light. The Death Eaters had arrived. The battle for Hogwarts was brief but brutal. 12 Death Eaters had breached the outer wards, led by a masked figure whose silver hand gleamed in the moonlight, Peter Pettigrew, fulfilling his master's orders. They'd expected to find a school full of sleeping children and a handful of defenders. Instead, they found an army. Aurors emerged from concealment positions, spells blazing. Teachers joined the fight, McGonagall's transfigurations turning statues into soldiers, Flitwick's charms creating zones of confusion and disorientation. Even Snape, his cover finally blown, dueled with a ferocity that shocked his former colleagues. Chen watched through the window of Dumbledore's office as the battle unfolded. She couldn't follow the details, the spells were too fast, the tactics too foreign, but she could see the tide turning in the defenders' favor. 6 Death Eaters fell in the first 2 minutes. 3 more in the next 5. The remaining attackers tried to retreat, but the wards had been adjusted, easy to enter, impossible to leave. Only Pettigrew escaped, transforming into his rat form and scurrying through a crack in the stonework too small for any human to follow. The trap had worked. But it had also failed. He got away, Harry said, his expression dark. Pettigrew. He's the one who has to perform the ritual. Without him, they can't proceed. We killed or captured most of their force, Chen pointed out. That has to count for something. It buys us time. Maybe. Harry turned away from the window. But Voldemort won't give up. He'll find another way. He always does. Dumbledore appeared at the office door, his robes singed, his expression grave. The battle is won, he said. But you're right, Harry, Pettigrew's escape is a setback. We must assume the ritual will proceed as planned. Then we attack the chamber. Now, before they can recover. We're not ready. The casualties we've suffered, the resources we've expended, will never be ready. Not perfectly. But every hour we wait, Voldemort gets stronger. Harry's voice was fierce. He has Draco down there. An 11-year-old boy whose only crime was having the wrong father. If we don't act now, that boy dies. Dumbledore was silent for a long moment. You're right, he said finally. Sometimes we must act before we're ready. Sometimes the cost of waiting is greater than the cost of moving. He straightened, a new resolve hardening his features. Gather everyone who can still fight. We end this tonight. The entrance to the Chamber of Secrets was exactly where Harry had said it would be, a seemingly ordinary sink in a dingy bathroom on the second floor, haunted by the ghost of a girl who had died there 50 years before. Harry approached the sink, feeling the others behind him, Dumbledore, Snape, McGonagall, Amelia, a squad of Aurors, and Chen, who had flat out refused to stay behind. This is mad, one of the Aurors muttered. We're assaulting you-know-whose stronghold with a child at point. That child is the only one who can open the door, Amelia replied quietly. And he knows more about what we're facing than any of us. Harry reached out with his senses, feeling for the hidden mechanism. The snake, he could hear it now, hissing in a language only he understood. Open, it whispered. Open and enter. Open, he hissed in Parseltongue. The sink sank into the floor, revealing a dark tunnel that plunged into the earth. Cold air rushed up from below, carrying the smell of damp and decay. I'll go first, Harry said. If there are traps, I'll sense them. Absolutely not, McGonagall began. I'm not asking permission. Harry met her eyes steadily. This is my fight. My prophecy. My connection to Voldemort. Either I lead, or we don't go at all. The silence stretched. The boy has a point, Snape said unexpectedly. His abilities give him advantages none of us possess. If anyone can navigate whatever the Dark Lord has prepared, it's him. Harry nodded to Snape, a silent acknowledgement, and stepped into the darkness. The tunnel was a slide, smooth and slick, descending deep beneath the castle. Harry let himself fall, controlling his speed with careful friction, feeling the others following behind him. The walls were carved with serpents, their eyes seeming to follow his passage, their carved tongues flickering in the magical light. He landed in a cavern, vast and echoing, the ceiling lost in shadow. Bones crunched beneath his feet, rats, he realized, and other small creatures, the leavings of whatever had made this place its home. Harry. Dumbledore landed beside him, wand drawn, scanning the darkness. What do you sense? Harry closed his eyes and reached out with his mind. The chamber stretched before him like a map, corridors and caverns, traps and wards, and at the center, a massive space where something vast was sleeping. Beyond that, in a smaller chamber, he felt Draco's terror, Pettigrew's groveling fear, and Harry Potter. The voice was in his mind, cold and amused. Welcome home. Harry's eyes snapped open. He knows we're here. Of course he does, Voldemort's voice echoed through the cavern, coming from everywhere and nowhere. Did you think I wouldn't feel you coming? The connection we share, it works both ways, my young enemy. Light flared throughout the chamber, revealing its full horror. Ancient stone, carved with serpents and skulls. Massive columns, reaching toward an invisible ceiling. And at the far end, raised on a platform of black marble, a throne. Voldemort sat upon it. He was barely human, pale as bone, hairless, with eyes that burned crimson in the magical light. His form was thin, wasted, more wraith than flesh, but power radiated from him like heat from a furnace. "I must thank you, Harry," he said, his voice a serpentine hiss. "You've delivered yourself to me at the perfect moment. Your blood is the last ingredient I need." The Death Eaters emerged from the shadows, not the forces they defeated at the castle, but a second wave, held in reserve for exactly this moment. 15, 20, maybe more, surrounding the small band of rescuers with wands raised and masks gleaming. "Kill the others," Voldemort commanded. "Bring me the boy." And the Chamber of Secrets erupted into war. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4, Fracture Lines. The first spell nearly took Chen's head off. She dropped flat on instinct, years of training kicking in before conscious thought could catch up. A jet of green light, the killing curse, she'd learned enough to recognize it, screamed over her and shattered against the stone wall, sending fragments raining down. Around her, chaos erupted. Dumbledore moved like water, his wand tracing patterns in the air that deflected curses and sent attackers flying. McGonagall had transformed into a great cat, slashing at Death Eaters with claws that seemed to cut through their shields. Snape fought with brutal efficiency, his spells precise and devastating. But there were too many enemies, and the space was too confined, and Voldemort watched from his throne with the patience of a snake waiting to strike. Harry stood at the center of the battle, untouched. Not because the Death Eaters weren't trying to reach him, they were, desperately, following their master's command. But every spell that came near him simply stopped. Hung in the air for a fraction of a second, then dissolved into nothing. Chen had never seen anything like it. "Fascinating," Voldemort said, his voice cutting through the din of battle. "You've developed protections I didn't anticipate. Your mother's sacrifice, perhaps, evolved into something new. Or is it something else entirely?" Harry didn't respond. His eyes were closed, his face a mask of concentration, and the air around him shimmered with power that Chen could almost see, a barrier of pure will, fueled by something deeper than magic. "No matter." Voldemort rose from his throne, and the temperature in the chamber dropped. "Whatever shield you've constructed, it won't save you from me." He raised his wand, and the world went white. The curse that Voldemort unleashed was nothing like the spells the Death Eaters had been throwing. It was a wave of darkness, a tsunami of malevolent energy that swept across the chamber and crushed everything in its path. Dumbledore threw up a shield that cracked under the impact. McGonagall was thrown backward, her feline form tumbling across the stone floor. Aurors screamed as the darkness touched them, collapsing into unconsciousness or worse. Chen felt it wash over her, cold, so cold, like being drowned in ice, and then Harry was there, standing between her and the darkness, his hands raised, his voice crying out in a language she didn't understand. The darkness parted around them like water around a stone. "Impossible," Voldemort hissed. "That was the killing wave, nothing can withstand it, I can." Harry's voice was different now. Deeper. Resonant. As if more than one person was speaking through his mouth. "I carry your soul, Tom. Your magic. And I've learned to use it against you." For the first time, Chen saw something flicker across Voldemort's inhuman face. Not fear, exactly, but uncertainty. The expression of a predator who had suddenly realized his prey had teeth. "You don't understand what you're doing, boy. The soul fragment in your scar, if you draw too heavily on its power, it will consume you. You'll become me." "No." Harry took a step forward, and the air crackled around him. "I'll become something you never anticipated. Something that has your power and my will. Something that knows all your secrets because it shares your soul." He raised his hand, and Voldemort flinched, actually flinched, the Dark Lord who had terrorized magical Britain for decades. "Where are the other Horcruxes, Tom? I can see them in your memories." "A diary. A cup. A locket. A diadem. And something else, something living. Harry's eyes widened. Your snake. Nagini is a Horcrux. Silence. Voldemort's composure shattered. He raised his wand and unleashed a barrage of curses, each one more powerful than the last. Harry deflected them. Not with a shield, not with counterspells, but with something simpler. He caught each curse in his hand and crushed it, the magical energy dissipating between his fingers like smoke. How are you doing this? Voldemort demanded. You made me, Tom. 11 years ago, when you killed my parents and tried to kill me. Your curse created a connection between us, one that you thought would be your weapon. But connections work both ways. Harry smiled, and it was a terrible smile. I've spent weeks practicing. Learning. Understanding exactly what flows through the link between us. Your power. Your knowledge. Your weaknesses. He gestured, and the Death Eaters surrounding them suddenly clutched at their arms, their dark marks burning, compelling them to stillness. You branded them with your magic. That means I can control them too. The Death Eaters fell to their knees, screaming. Chen watched in horror and awe as Harry systematically dismantled Voldemort's forces. The dark marks, the brands that linked every Death Eater to their master, had become chains. Harry held the other end of those chains now, and he was not gentle. One by one, the masked figures collapsed, overwhelmed by pain they couldn't resist, their wands clattering uselessly to the ground. Only Voldemort remained standing. His crimson eyes blazed with fury, his wasted form trembling with barely contained rage. You think this is victory, boy? You think you've won? He laughed, a high, cold sound that echoed through the chamber. I've prepared for everything. Even for this. He gestured, and a section of the chamber wall slid open, revealing a hidden alcove. Inside, bound in chains of magical fire, was Draco Malfoy, pale, terrified, but alive. And standing over him, silver hand pressed against the boy's throat, was Peter Pettigrew. Release my servants, Voldemort commanded. Or young Malfoy dies. Harry's concentration wavered. The Death Eaters stirred, their dark marks still burning but no longer incapacitating. You don't care about Draco, Harry said. He's nothing to you, just another tool. He's nothing to me. But he means something to you, doesn't he? I can see it in your mind, Harry. You came here to save him. To prove that you're different from me. Voldemort's lipless mouth curved. That's your weakness. Caring about others. Letting their fates influence your decisions. It's not a weakness. Then prove it. Maintain your hold on my Death Eaters, and watch Pettigrew cut the boy's throat. Or release them, and try to save him. Either way, I win. The moment stretched. Chen saw Harry's face, the conflict, the calculation, the desperate search for a third option. Then Snape moved. He'd been lying still among the fallen Aurors, apparently unconscious. But as Voldemort gloated and Pettigrew tightened his grip on Draco, Snape raised his wand with the same brutal precision he'd shown in battle. Avada Kedavra. The green light struck Pettigrew in the chest. The rat-like man's eyes went wide with shock, and then he crumpled, his silver hand sliding away from Draco's throat, his body tumbling off the platform like a discarded puppet. For a moment, the chamber was absolutely silent. Then Voldemort screamed. It was a sound of pure fury, of plans unraveling, of a mind that had never truly accepted that others might oppose his will. He raised his wand toward Snape, the killing curse already forming, and Harry struck. Not with magic. Not with the power he'd been wielding throughout the battle. He simply reached through the connection that bound him to Voldemort and pulled. The Dark Lord convulsed, his skeletal form arching backward, his wand tumbling from nerveless fingers. His crimson eyes bulged, his mouth opening in a silent howl, as something was torn from the deepest part of him. You put pieces of your soul into objects, Harry said, his voice echoing with power. But you also put a piece into me. And that piece, the one in my scar, has been connected to all the others this whole time. A web of soul fragments, with me at the center. He pulled again, and Voldemort fell to his knees. I can't destroy the Horcruxes from here. But I can feel them. And through them, I can feel you. Every dark thought, every cruel memory, every moment of weakness you've ever tried to hide. Harry knelt beside the Dark Lord, meeting those crimson eyes with his own green ones. You're afraid, Tom. You've always been afraid. Of death, of insignificance, of being forgotten. That fear drove you to become a monster, to murder and torture and enslave. And now that fear is all you have left. Voldemort's form flickered, becoming less substantial, as if he were fading away. No, he gasped. I am Lord Voldemort. I cannot be defeated, you've already been defeated. Twice. Harry stood. This is the third time. And unlike the first two, you're not going to come back. He turned to Dumbledore, who had risen and was watching with an expression of profound shock. The Horcruxes. You know where they are now, I've seen the locations in his memories. The diary is with a family called Weasley, left there by Malfoy years ago. The cup is in Bellatrix Lestrange's vault at Gringotts. The locket is in a cave on the coast. The diadem is here at Hogwarts, in a hidden room. And the snake. He looked back at Voldemort's writhing form. The snake is with what's left of his human body. Somewhere in Albania, where he's been hiding all these years. The ritual, Voldemort gasped. I was so close, you needed my blood. Blood of the enemy, forcibly taken. Harry shook his head. You never understood, Tom. I was never just your enemy. I was your vessel, your connection to life, the part of you that could still touch the world of the living. And by making that connection, you gave me power over you. He raised his hand one final time. Goodbye, Tom. The last threads of Voldemort's presence tore away. The wraith-like form dissolved into screaming darkness, shredded by forces it had never anticipated, and dispersed into nothing. The Chamber of Secrets fell silent. The aftermath was chaos. Voldemort's defeat didn't destroy his Horcruxes, Harry had been clear about that. But it did sever the connection that had allowed the Dark Lord to maintain his coherent existence. Without the central will binding them together, the soul fragments became inert, waiting to be found and destroyed. More immediately, there were wounded to tend and prisoners to secure. The Death Eaters, freed from the Dark Mark's compulsion when Voldemort fell, were too disoriented to resist capture. 11 of them were taken into custody, for more had died in the battle. The survivors would face the Wizengamot's justice, their trials made simple by the abundance of evidence. Draco Malfoy was freed from his chains and placed in the care of St. Mungo's healers. The boy was traumatized but physically unharmed. Voldemort had kept him intact, intending to use his blood for the ritual if Harry couldn't be captured. His mother, Narcissa, was already on her way to the hospital, her catatonia broken by the news of her son's rescue. Snape had killed Pettigrew. The implications of that, both legal and personal, would take time to sort out. For now, he sat apart from the others, his face unreadable, cleaning blood from his robes with methodical precision. Chin found Harry sitting on the steps of Voldemort's empty throne, staring at nothing. Hey. She settled beside him. How are you doing? I don't know. His voice was distant. I can still feel where he was. In my head, in my soul. It's like there's a hole where the connection used to be. Is that good or bad? I don't know that either. He finally looked at her, and his eyes were very young, younger than they'd seemed at any point since she'd met him. I killed him. Not with a spell or a weapon, but I tore him apart. I reached into his soul and ripped it to pieces. You defended yourself. You defended all of us. I know. But the way it felt. Harry shuddered. There was a moment, right at the end, when I could see everything he was. All his memories, all his fears, all the reasons he became what he became. And I understood him. I understood why he did all those terrible things. Chen waited. He was scared. His whole life, from the moment he was born, he was terrified of being powerless, of being vulnerable, of being nothing. The orphanage, Hogwarts, everything that came after, it was all about making sure no one could ever hurt him again. Harry's voice cracked. And I used that fear to destroy him. I looked into his soul and found the thing he was most afraid of, and I made him feel it. That doesn't make you like him. Doesn't it? I have his power now. I can feel it, the magic he spent decades accumulating, the knowledge he gathered, the connections to his followers. It's all inside me, waiting to be used. Harry raised his hand, and shadows gathered around his fingers. What if I become like him? What if the power changes me? Then we'll stop you. Chen's voice was firm. That's what people who love you are for, Harry. To keep you honest. To remind you who you are when you start to forget. Harry looked at her with something like wonder. You love me. I've known you for 3 weeks. You're a 7-year-old child who walked into my station and asked for help, and since then you've survived more than most adults experience in a lifetime. Chen put her hand on his shoulder. So yes, Harry. I love you. Not because of prophecies or destiny or any of that nonsense. Just because you're a kid who deserves to be loved, and I'm an adult who's choosing to do it. For a long moment, Harry was silent. Then, slowly, he leaned into her touch, the same instinctive movement she'd seen in the ministry, a child seeking comfort from an adult who offered it freely. I don't know what happens next, he said quietly. Neither do I. But we'll figure it out together. She squeezed his shoulder. That's how families work. The following days were a whirlwind of aftermath. The Horcruxes were hunted down and destroyed, one by one. Dumbledore retrieved the ring from Little Hangleton, burning through its protections with fiendfire and nearly losing his hand to the curse that guarded it. The locket was found in a cave on the coast, protected by inferi and dark enchantments, but a team of Aurors managed to retrieve it with only minor casualties. The diadem was located in the Room of Requirement at Hogwarts, hidden among centuries of accumulated detritus. The cup required a raid on Gringotts itself, a diplomatic nightmare that Amelia somehow navigated without starting a war with the Goblin Nation. The diary was the strangest case. It had indeed been given to the Weasley family by Lucius Malfoy, slipped into the cauldron of young Ginny Weasley during a chance encounter at a bookshop. The girl had been writing in it for months, and the fragment of Voldemort's soul had been slowly possessing her, draining her life force to fuel its own resurrection. Harry sensed it the moment he entered the Weasley home. The corruption, the dark presence feeding on an innocent child, it was sickeningly familiar. He destroyed the diary himself, driving Gryffindor's sword through its pages while the Weasley family watched in horror. The screaming face that emerged from the ruined book, young Tom Riddle, handsome and cruel, dissolved into nothing, and Ginny collapsed, freed from its influence. She would recover. The healers were confident about that. But the experience had marked her, just as Harry's experiences had marked him. Another casualty of Voldemort's war. Another child scarred by a monster's ambition. Only the snake remained. Nagini, somewhere in Albania, still carrying the last piece of Voldemort's soul. A team was being assembled to find and destroy her, but the search would take time. The forests of Albania were vast, and the snake was cunning. For now, though, the immediate crisis was over. Voldemort was gone, his followers scattered or imprisoned, his power broken. Magical Britain could begin to heal. A week after the battle, Harry was summoned to the Wizengamot. The chamber was packed, every seat filled, the galleries overflowing with spectators who had come to see the boy who lived, the child who had defeated the Dark Lord not once but 3 times. Ministers and officials sat in the front rows, their faces a mixture of awe, fear, and calculated interest. Dumbledore presided, his expression solemn. Beside him sat Amelia Bones, Chen, and, to Harry's surprise, Narcissa Malfoy, her face still pale but composed. "Harry James Potter," Dumbledore began, his voice carrying through the silent chamber. "You stand before this body not as an accused, but as a recognized hero of magical Britain. Your actions in the Chamber of Secrets saved countless lives and ended a threat that has loomed over our society for decades." Murmurs of approval swept through the crowd. "However," Dumbledore continued, "your actions also raise questions that this body must address. You wielded powers that no wizard has demonstrated before, powers that derive, at least in part, from your connection to the darkest wizard of our age. We must determine how those powers should be treated under magical law, and what safeguards, if any, should be put in place." Harry stepped forward. "I expected this." "You did? I've been inside Voldemort's mind. I know how wizards think about power, especially power they don't understand." He scanned the assembled faces, reading their truths with the ability he developed. "Some of you are genuinely concerned about safety. You want to make sure I don't become another Dark Lord. I respect that." He turned slightly, his gaze finding certain faces in the crowd. "Others aren't concerned about safety at all. You're afraid of competition. You've spent your lives accumulating power, influence, position, and now there's a child who can look into your soul and see all the compromises you've made to get where you are." Several wizards shifted uncomfortably. "And a few of you." Harry's voice hardened. "A few of you are wondering whether I can be controlled. Whether my abilities can be turned into a weapon for your particular faction. You're already planning how to manipulate me, how to earn my trust, how to use me the way Voldemort wanted to use me." The chamber was very quiet now. "Here's what I want you to understand." Harry's voice carried the strange resonance it had developed during the battle, the echo of power beyond his years. "I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't ask to be the boy who lived, or the vessel for a monster's soul, or the weapon in someone else's prophecy. All I asked for, the night I walked into that police station, was for someone to help me." He glanced at Chen, a brief moment of warmth crossing his face. "I got that help. From people who cared about me as a person, not as a symbol or a tool. And because of them, I'm standing here today, not as Voldemort's weapon, but as myself." He turned back to the Wizengamot. "So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to learn to control my abilities. I'm going to help destroy the last Horcrux and ensure Voldemort can never return. And then I'm going to live my life, go to school, make friends, figure out who I want to be. Like any other child. And if we decide that your powers require oversight." The speaker was an elderly wizard whose name Harry didn't know, but whose truth he could read clearly: ambition, calculation, a desire to be the one holding the leash. "Then you'll discover that I'm not as easy to control as you think." Harry met the man's eyes, and let him feel, just for a moment, the power that burned beneath Harry's calm surface. "I don't want to fight you. I don't want to fight anyone. But I won't be caged, monitored, or managed. Not by the Ministry, not by Dumbledore, not by anyone." The elderly wizard went pale and looked away. Dumbledore cleared his throat. "I believe Harry has made his position clear. The question before this body is how to respond." Amelia stood. "I move that Harry Potter be recognized as a protected ward of the Ministry, entitled to the same legal rights and protections as any adult wizard, with the additional provision that any attempt to control, manipulate, or exploit his abilities be treated as a criminal offense." Seconded, Augusta Longbottom called out. The vote was not unanimous. Harry could see the dissenters, feel their resentment and fear, but it passed by a comfortable margin. Whatever games the politicians wanted to play, none of them were willing to openly oppose the child who had just defeated the Dark Lord. "One more thing," Harry said as the session was concluding. "Yes, Mr. Potter." "Detective Inspector Chen. She's been with me through all of this, she was the first person who believed me, the first person who helped me. I want her to remain involved in my life. She's a muggle, someone objected. The statute of secrecy already failed in my case. Chen knows everything, and she can't be obliviated. The question is whether you're going to treat her as a criminal for helping a child, or whether you're going to recognize that sometimes the rules need to bend. Dumbledore smiled slightly. I believe an exception can be made. Inspector Chen has proven herself a valuable ally to our world. It would be foolish to discard that alliance over bureaucratic concerns. The motion passed with less resistance than Harry had expected. Perhaps the Wizengamot was learning. Or perhaps they were simply too exhausted to fight anymore. Either way, Chen was staying. And that, more than any political victory, felt like winning. That night, Harry sat with Chen in the Hogwarts infirmary, where several of the wounded from the battle were still recovering. You handled that well, Chen said. The Wizengamot thing. You scared them exactly enough to get what you wanted without making them hate you. I learned from watching Voldemort. Harry's voice was thoughtful. He ruled through fear, but he took it too far. Made people desperate enough to fight back. I don't want to be feared, I just want to be left alone. You think they'll leave you alone? No. There will always be people who want to use me, control me, turn me into something I'm not. But now they know what I can do. They'll think twice before trying. Chen was quiet for a moment. What's next for you, Harry? The immediate crisis is over, but you're still 7 years old. You've got your whole life ahead of you. Harry considered the question. I want to go to Hogwarts properly. Not as a weapon or a symbol, but as a student. I want to learn magic, make friends, have the childhood I never got to have. That sounds healthy. It probably won't happen. A wry smile crossed Harry's face. Something will come up. It always does. But I can try. And the piece of Voldemort's soul? The one in your scar? Harry touched his forehead, where the lightning bolt scar still marked his skin. It's different now. When I tore Voldemort apart, I damaged the fragment too. It's quieter. Less like a presence and more like a memory. Is that good? I think so. It means I'm more myself and less him. He paused. But it also means some of his power has become permanently mine. The Parseltongue, the ability to control the dark marks, the connection to dark magic, that's not going away. Can you handle that? Having that kind of power, at your age? I don't have a choice. The power is part of me now, rejecting it would be like rejecting my own arms. Harry met her eyes. But I have people who will help me use it wisely. You, Amelia, McGonagall, even Dumbledore. As long as I have that support, I think I'll be okay. Chen nodded slowly. For what it's worth, I think you will be too. You're the strongest person I've ever met, Harry. Not because of the magic, but because of who you are underneath it. Harry was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was very young. Will you stay? Not just as an official liaison or whatever the ministry calls it. As family? Chen felt her heart break and mend in the same instant. Yeah, Harry. I'll stay. For as long as you want me. He leaned against her shoulder, and she wrapped an arm around him, and for a while they just sat together in the quiet of the infirmary. Outside, the magical world was still reeling from everything that had happened. There would be political battles, legal complications, the ongoing hunt for the last Horcrux. Life would not be simple or easy. But for this moment, at least, Harry Potter was not alone. He had a family, strange and unconventional and built from necessity rather than blood, but a family nonetheless. And that was something Voldemort, for all his power, had never understood. 3 months later, the snake was found. Nagini had been hiding in a cave system in the Albanian mountains, surviving on rats and small animals, waiting for a master who would never return. When the hunting team finally cornered her, she fought with desperate ferocity, but she was just a snake, in the end, and the wizards were many. Harry was there for the final blow. He'd insisted, despite everyone's objections, because this was the last piece of Voldemort's soul. The last fragment of the monster who had killed his parents, tortured him through the Dursleys, and tried to use him as a weapon. He wanted to see it end. The snake's eyes met his as the sword fell. For just an instant, Harry felt Voldemort's presence one last time, diminished, confused, still not understanding how everything had gone so wrong. Then the blade struck, and the presence vanished forever. Harry stood over the snake's body for a long moment. Then he turned and walked away, leaving the carcass for the others to dispose of. It was over. Truly, finally, completely over. Voldemort was gone. The return to Britain was quiet. Harry didn't want fanfare or celebration, he wanted to rest, to process, to begin the slow work of building a normal life. Amelia had arranged for him to live with her as an official ward, with Chen maintaining a regular presence as a cultural liaison, a title invented to justify a Muggle's continued involvement in magical affairs. The arrangement was unusual, but then, everything about Harry was unusual. Hogwarts awaited him in September. For years away, but the time would pass quickly. There was so much to learn, so much to experience, so much life waiting to be lived. On his 8th birthday, Harry stood on the cliffs near Dover, watching the sun set over the channel. Chen stood beside him, along with Amelia, McGonagall, and, somewhat awkwardly, Dumbledore. "Thank you," Harry said quietly. "All of you. For believing in me when I needed it most." "You made it easy," Chen replied. "You walked into my station and told the truth. Everything else followed from that. It wasn't just the truth. It was the willingness to act. To refuse to accept what was happening to me." Harry turned to face them. "That's what I want to pass on. Not the power or the fame or any of that. Just the knowledge that you can always choose to act, no matter how powerless you feel." "A worthy legacy," Dumbledore said softly. "It's not a legacy. It's a beginning." Harry smiled, a real smile, full of hope instead of hardness. "I've spent my whole life reacting to what others did to me. Now I get to decide what I do next." "And what will that be?" McGonagall asked. Harry looked out at the horizon, where the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. "I'm going to learn everything I can. Not just magic, everything. History, science, politics, art. I want to understand the world, all of it, so that when I act wisely. And after that? I don't know yet. But whatever it is, it'll be my choice." He turned back to them, and his eyes held a certainty that belied his age. "No more prophecies controlling my destiny. No more dark lords shaping my path. Just me, deciding who I want to be." He walked to the edge of the cliff and spread his arms, letting the wind catch his robes, feeling the magic that hummed through his bones and the potential that stretched before him like an endless ocean. The boy who lived had survived everything that had been thrown at him. The child who had walked into a police station had grown into something new, not a weapon, not a symbol, but a person with the power to choose his own fate. And the story was just beginning. Far away, in a ministry holding cell, Lucius Malfoy received a visitor. "Lord Malfoy." The voice was cold, measured. "We haven't been formally introduced. My name is Croaker. I work for the Department of Mysteries." Malfoy looked up from his cot, his aristocratic features haggard from months of imprisonment. "What do you want?" "Information. About the Dark Lord's plans, specifically, the ones you never told the Aurors about." "I told them everything under Veritaserum." "You told them everything you consciously knew." Croaker smiled thinly. "But memory is more complex than that. There are things buried deep, things the Dark Lord hid from you, things you saw but didn't understand. I can help you remember." "And what do you want in return?" "The department has interests that extend beyond the ministry's petty politics. We've been studying Harry Potter's abilities, and we believe they represent something unprecedented, a new form of magic that could change everything we understand about souls, consciousness, and power. Malfoy's eyes narrowed. You want to use the boy. We want to understand him. And to do that, we need to understand what the Dark Lord did, every ritual, every enchantment, every piece of the puzzle. Croaker leaned forward. Help us, Lord Malfoy, and perhaps your sentence can be reconsidered. For a long moment, Malfoy was silent. Then, slowly, he nodded. What do you want to know? The Department of Mysteries had its own agenda. Harry Potter had won the battle, but there were forces in the magical world that operated on a different scale, forces that saw in his abilities not a threat to be contained, but a resource to be exploited. The immediate war was over. But the game of power never truly ended. In the village of Little Hangleton, the gaunt shack stood empty. The ring Horcrux had been destroyed, its curse broken, its connection to Voldemort severed forever. The building itself remained, a rotting monument to a family that had destroyed itself through generations of pride and madness. But something lingered there. Not Voldemort, he was truly gone, his soul finally torn apart beyond any hope of resurrection. Something older. Something that had been waiting in the stones and the soil long before Tom Riddle was born. The Peveril bloodline had always carried power. Not just magical power, something deeper. A connection to forces that existed before the Hogwarts founders, before the Statute of Secrecy, before the wizarding world as modern magic users understood it. Harry Potter carried that bloodline too. Through his father, through the Potters who had descended from the Peverils, through centuries of inheritance that no one had thought to examine closely. The Resurrection Stone had been destroyed along with the ring. The Elder Wand remained hidden, its location known only to Dumbledore. And the Cloak of Invisibility. The Cloak of Invisibility had been in James Potter's possession when he died. It had been recovered from the ruins of the Potter cottage and placed in trust, waiting for Harry to claim it when he came of age. 3 Hallows. 3 artifacts of power, connected to a legend most wizards dismissed as children's stories. And at the center of it all, a boy who had already proven that the impossible was merely improbable. The story of Harry Potter was not over. It was only beginning to reveal its true shape.